Whenever you're ready to drift off, take a slow breath in and let the day loosen its hands. As you settle in for the night, picture a small stone dish glowing like a patient moon. A wick braided from moss drinks seal oil so cleanly that even the snow above stays pale. Boots steam gently nearby. A kettle hums without hurry. Nothing needs you now. Tonight, let's quietly explore the kinds of work that keep life stitched together. We'll begin beside an Arctic lamp that warms stories and soup with the same steady light. We'll open a teahouse ledger in Song-dynasty China, where abacus beads slide like rain along bamboo. We'll step into the great market of Tlatelolco to hear cacao beans counted by cords and painted boards. And we'll walk a Dutch bog in summer, where neat bricks of peat are lifted and stacked to become winter fire. The pacing will be slow and descriptive. Soft textures, small sounds, and familiar movements. Nothing sharp. Nothing rushed. You can let your breath match the rhythm and drift whenever it feels right. If your shoulders are comfortable and the covers feel just right against your skin, we'll begin with the lamp that kept long winter nights friendly, a gentle circle of light where needles found their thread and hands remembered the shape of home. We arrive in a house shaped for cold. Snow banks lean against the outer wall like quiet neighbors. Inside, the room is low and close, the air holding a calm warmth that feels earned. At the center sits a shallow arc of soapstone with a lip like a crescent shore. This is the qulliq. Its wick is a braid of dried moss laid along the rim, one end coaxed into flame, the rest drinking steadily from clear oil that carries the clean scent of sea and winter. The fire is not bright, not loud, just a low, blue-edged thung that keeps shadows soft. Before the flame, hands have already done their careful rounds. A bone spoon scraped yesterday's soot from the stone's curve, not to polish it, only to make a fresh bed for today's light. A small pot of oil was set nearby, skin warm, and stretched, ready to pour the day's kindness along the lamp's edge. A woman pinched the wick between dampened fingers, training it to burn evenly, the way a singer warms a voice to the right note. She knows the sound the lamp prefers, a quiet, continuous murmur, not a sputter, not a hiss. Round the lamp, life arranges itself. A kettle rests onto flat stones bridging the lamp's mouth, and from it rises a soft cloud that smells of hot water and faint tea. Boots stand open to the warmth, their felted insides breathing out a day of frost. A child's mittens lie palm to palm on a line of twine above, drying into plump, useful shapes. Needles glint briefly, then vanish again, only to glint once more, tiny stars in a winter sky of fur and skin. A gentle side note, in many northern homes light and heat came from the same quiet source. Fuel was precious, flame was purposeful. The lamp cooked, dried, softened, and guided. Brightness was less important than the evenness of warmth, the way it spread through air and cloth and breath. The woman settles onto a low platform covered with skins worked soft and clean. Her parka's hood is edged with fur that whispers when she moves. She threads a length of sinew thin, strong, slightly sticky from careful chewing that turned fibers into cord. The needle glides through sealskin with a sound like a page turned in a cold library. Each stitch is small and close, the seam rubbed smooth with a bone tool so it will lie flat and keep out wind. Beside the lamp sits a shallow bowl with a little pile of fresh moss, dried in summer and kept in a seal bladder through the fall. She feeds the wick a finger's length when the flame asks for it, learned by color more than height. To yellow means smoke. To low, and the kettle forgets to steam. Somewhere between lies the right, helpful fire. A man enters, bringing the crisp edge of outside air. He kneels without speaking and holds out a length of rawhide line pulled from the sled to thaw, and remember flexibility. He turns it in his hands as the warmth climbs into the fibers. The line will be run across the room and wound back into a coil that fits the hand. He tests a splice, smiles without showing teeth, and nods to the lamp as if to a friend who knows why smiles are small in winter. The child leans closer, guided by a preventing hand that knows just where to hover. Eyes reflect the conflame. A story begins, not loudly. It travels in short sentences that carry river ice and summer hunts, the shape of distant hills, the way geese look when they fold into the water. The lamp listens with the same interest it gives to soup and stitches. Between sentences, the kettle adds a soft note, little breaths against its lid. On a low shelf, small tools wait, an ulu with a crescent blade that curves like the lamp itself. A scraper made from antler, its edge polished by thousands of careful strokes. A hollowed stone for grinding dried herbs into something that tastes like memory when the snow is thick. Each has a place where the hand finds it without searching. The lamp's light lays a thin wash over the shelf, naming each object with a line of pale gold. A gentle side note, housekeeping in rooms like this is a form of weather control. Dry things stay dry because puffs for air are kept clear. Wet things gather where warmth and patience can do their work. Tools live ready. Nothing wastes heat by being difficult to find. Later, the woman tips a spoon of oil along the rim, not to feed the flame greedily, only to keep it even. The lamp responds with a steadier breath. She pinches the wick's edge with wet fingers to trim without ash. The child's mitten turns on the line, presenting the other side to warmth, a polite guest at a long table. The man lifts the kettle with a folded scrap of fur and pours into a small cup a liquid that is mostly heat and gratitude. He holds it near his face and inhales as if the steam itself were food. The cup passes hand to hand. Each sip returns a little of the day to quiet places in the chest. There is a piece of dried meat softened in broth, shared in neat bites that know each person's measure without counting. Fur boots are moved closer, then farther, then closer again, finding that line where steam becomes comfort without wet. A bone needle is worn between fingers so it slips more kindly through skin. A thread end is chewed to a point, a small, practical ritual. The lamp does not look at any of this, and yet it sees everything by doing its single task well. Outside, the wind writes low words along the roof, and snow answers by not moving. Inside, the lamp's flame barely lifts. Shadows rest in seams and under the curve of the kettle. The floor's drift of fine sand from the last trip ashore lies still, a map of steps walked carefully and then forgotten. A dog coughs once in sleep and settles into a circle of its own warmth. A gentle side note, the qulliq's economy is a lesson dressed as a flame. It teaches that a small, tended source can do many things at once when the room is arranged around it with respect. The lamp is not the center because it is grand. It is the center because it is reliable. As the story reaches an old ending one everyone knows but still enjoys, the woman smooths the last seam with the bone tool, and sets the boot to cure near the lying. She wets her fingers and speaks quietly to the wick through the touch. Lower, smaller, rest. The flame obeys, becoming a tidy leaf of light. The kettle's lid trembles, then steadies. Breath in the room slows to match. Outside, the cold pulls the stars closer. Inside, the lamp keeps night friendly, knitting edges together with warm patience. And while the flame holds its oval shape, we can stay here a little longer, listening to needles, to soft cups set down, to the quiet living of a winter evening that asked for nothing except care. Toward the middle of evening, the lamp's breath becomes the house's clock. It speaks in small adjustments. A finger of oil travels along the rim. The wick drinks and answers with a steady blue edge. The woman watches without staring, the way one listens to a friend's quiet. When the flame leans too eagerly, she pinches the moss edge with wetted fingertips. A faint ts and a curl of pale smoke, then come again. She wipes a tiny soot bead from the stone lip with a twist of seal fur and sets the cloth back in its place. A gentle side note, trimming wicks with wet fingers, is a craft of quick touch and trust. The moisture shields skin, the speed keeps heat polite. Done often, it becomes as natural as smoothing hair from a child's forehead. The man loosens a knot on a bundle that was stiff as bone at dusk. Warmth, held low and constant, has persuaded it to become line again pliable, obedient to hands. He runs the length through fingers, feeling for stiff places, for tiny burrs that would bite a sled runner or chew a mitten's cuff. When he finds a proud fiber, he folds it under with the pad of his thumb, breath steady, lamplight steady. The line coils back into a hoop the hand will remember by morning. On the low shelf, a shallow stone bowl holds snow pressed firm and white. He tips a little into the kettle when steam thins. The snow gives itself to water without announcement. No boiling here, just a shy simmer that keeps cups honest and keeps the air from sharpening. The child's mittens turn again on their twine, palms now toward warmth. A sleeve cuff joins them, then a small cap, its fur ear flaps curved like gentle leaves. The woman opens a brown packet filled months ago when the sea was dark with fish. Dried strips wait, smoked and thin. She dips two into the kettle, just at the lip. They soften enough to chew thoughtfully. She tears a piece for the child, one for the man, and one for herself, then tucks the packet away, pressing the air out as a habit of mind as much as of storage. The lamp winks once in the steel of her needle and returns to its small oval. A gentle side note, parcels carry seasons forward. Summer becomes winter in a twist of grass string and a dry, careful hand. In such rooms, nothing is only itself. A packet is a promise, a line is a road, a lamp is a cook, and a hearth and a storyteller's companion. The child slides closer, blanket dragging like a tame cloud. The woman shifts the lamp a finger's width on its wooden trivet to share heat more evenly. She lifts the kettle and sets a small tripod of pebbles at a different angle, then returns the kettle so its shoulder catches the warmer part of the flame. Steam thickens for a moment and then smooths out. The adjustment is a language the room speaks. They mend a small slit in a boot where the ice had made a hard thought. The woman pushes her bone needle through 2 layers of softened skin, draws sinew through with a delicate tug, then rubs the new seam with a scrap of fat so it will not drink water like a thirsty thing. The man holds the boot in both hands, turning it to the light admiring the new line for being ordinary and strong. He sets it near but not over the lamp so orals can think their way through the skin. A dog lifts its head, blinks, and sighs. The child's eyes drift and open, drift and open. The woman tells a shorter story now, the kind that holds a single shape: an island, a seal, a bird's black wing tipping against sky. The lamp seems to listen, shaping its flame like a leaf cupping rain. The child's breathing settles into the familiar long pattern that tells adults to become quieter without becoming still. The man takes the bone spoon and skims a faint line of soot from the lamp's inner curve. He scrapes it into a small horn cup kept for such gleanings. Soot darkens to a fine, valuable powder that will mix with oil to mark sledwood, to write a line on a tool, to paint a small face at a festival time. Even the lamp's breath will be used again in another story of usefulness. A gentle side note: soot was once a color more common than any blue. In places where ink did not come from shops, soot and oil and patience learned to make their own mark. Now she feeds the wick a thumb's breadth of new moss. She does not lift the old out. She tucks the new against it so flame moves into it like water finding shore. The change is only visible if you knew the earlier shape. The lamp continues its slow, even work. Hands rub warmth into each other without thinking about it. From a peg, the man takes a small pouch of dried herb. He crumbles a pinch into the cup and fills with kettle water. The cup smells faintly of the plant and more strongly of heat. He wraps it in a strip of hide and sets it by the woman's sewing place. She sips and presses her lips together the way one does when a taste is not quite pleasant and yet perfectly right. He smiles. In winter, useful as a flavor many things were. The child has fallen asleep in the half-shadow cast by a hanging parka. The woman draws the blanket's edge up and tucks it under a small shoulder. She pinches the wick again, just slightly, and the flame lowers into a quiet that sits between waking and sleep. The man shifts the kettle aside, freeing more warmth to reach boots and line and newly made seam. Air moves enough to do its work, not enough to make edges complain. A gentle side note: a lamp like this teaches how to share. Heat is a circle, tasks visit the circle in turn. Drying, softening, simmering, mending, each gets its hour near the wren, and then makes way for another. She picks up the ulu and shaves a curl from a block of frozen fat. The curl lies on a scrap of hide, glistening. With 2 fingers she dresses the edges of the stone lamp, smoothing where oil likes to pool, so the flame's road stays even. The fat breaks and melts under her touch, leaving a sheen the eye barely sees. She rubs a bit onto the bone spoon's edge, too, so tomorrow's scraping will not make a scratch. Quiet continues, as if it were a substance poured carefully from one hour into the next. The man checks a sled runner set aside near the wall. He strokes it with a flat stone, listening for the change in sound that tells him the grain is flatter, kinder. He touches the lamp's warmth with the back of his hand, a worker's thermometer, then returns to his runner, pleased that the room is a workshop with manners. Wine flirts with the scene near the roof and thinks better of it. The house's skin, scraped thin and sewn close, lets sound in but keeps cold at the threshold. The lamp's light finds the curve of a comb made from antler and the straightness of a drill bowl hung carefully out of reach of curious fingers. Shadows from these become their own small company, lying along the wall like friendly animals. The woman lifts the lamp with both hands, careful and sure, and turns it the width of 2 fingers so a different part of the rim faces the room. The warmth spreads its politics fairly. She sets it down again with a soft stone-on-wood syllable. The flame blinks, then resumes. Soot writing above the lamp thins for a moment, then continues its faint, even script along the snow-smooth ceiling. The child whimpers once in sleep. The woman's hand already knows the path to the forehead, smoothing without waking. She hums one line of a tune that never quite ends. The lamp holds the middle of the room, not jealous, not proud. It simply keeps the flame exactly where it belongs. When the next hour arrives, measured by nothing a town clock would respect, the woman pinches the wick lower. The room receives the message and answers by deepening its shadows and bending closer to quilts and furs. The kettle lid lifts and sighs, then settles. The man tucks away the line and lays the runner with its back to the warm place, not too near, never too near. He sits and rubs his hands once more, not because they are cold, but because the friction is a kind of thanks. Outside, the sky makes that dry creak only very cold places can hear inside. The lamp makes that small ocean sound only very patient rooms can keep. Breath slows, thread rusts. The house gathers itself around the oval fire as if around a thought it has agreed to share. Night settles deeper, but the room grows no darker. The lamp's flame keeps its leaf shape and writes a thing quiet against the stone. The woman rests her work hand and takes up a different task. She checks a pouch of sinew thread prepared in autumn. Each strand was split, chewed to softness, and rubbed with a little fat to keep it docile. She moists her fingers and draws a length, feeling for knots, for stiff memories that would argue with a needle's eye. Where the thread feels proud, she speaks to it with the flat of her thumb until it remembers humility. She winds the length onto a tiny bone spool that fits neatly into a show cup. Order makes mornings kinder. The man reaches to a corner where a rack of small bundles hangs. Each bundle is named by season rather than by letter. Summer herbs dried to give water a gentle flavor, willow bark for stubborn aches, a twist of crowberries, shrunk dark, strips of weather-softened hide for patching. He lowers one and finds the crowberry strand. A few berries roll into his palm, wrinkled but true. He sets them in the cup and covers them with warm water. They swell a little, taking the shape of memory. The child will taste one tomorrow, a sweet reminder that days will be green again. A gentle side note: preservation is calendar keeping by other means. Shelves become months. Packets become weeks. You do not ask winter when it will end. You consult your bundles. The child stirs, turns to a new pocket of warmth, and slides into sleep again. The dog's paws twitch, chasing a scent that lives only in the mind. The woman lifts a strip of sealskin and rubs its grain with a pebble round as an egg. The skin begins to shine in a way only useful things shine. She measures with her eye the length that will become a cap strap, holds it against the lamp's light, and snips with a small iron scissor whose edges were sharpened when the moon was last thin. She warms a bone all against her palm and pierces even holes along the edge, not many, not few, just the number the hand wants to count without counting. The awl point finds its path through fibers taught by the lamp to be patient. A thread passes, then another. A knot lies flat where knots prefer to sit behind, not on top, like good thoughts in a small room. From the lamp's far side, a ladle with a long handle rests. The man moves the kettle aside and slides a shallow pot across the stone so fat can soften. He adds a curl shaved earlier and watches it sink and become clear, a small pool of stored days. When the surface shows a tremor, he removes the pot and places it on folded hide. Fat will become food, lantern dressing, seam rub, sled runner bong. He lowers a wood spoon into it and dips the spoon's lip, then lays it on a clean place so tomorrow's first touch will be easy. A gentle side note: many rooms in difficult climates keep the same rule: never heat anything for one purpose alone. Every warmth is a crossroads where errands meet and leave together. The woman tests the lamp's speech again. The flame looks right blue with a thin yellow crown like straw in sunlight. She pinches the wick's outer edge barely, and the crown tightens. No soot rises. The snow ceiling keeps its pale. She takes the bone spoon and, with light strokes, smooths the oil's path along the rim, like ironing a river so boats can pass. The lamp answers by forgetting to fuss. The man brings in a short drift of night from the entry. Air bites the throat once and is forgiven. He shakes powder from the parka's shoulders outside, then hangs it near a place the lamp touches in a polite way. Snow whispers against fur, turns to water, and walks away as breath. He rubs his hands together afterward, not because they are cold, but to return borrowed sharpness to the air where it belongs. On the floor lies a small sled runner offcut, short as a ruler. He sets it on his knee and rubs seal oil into it with the heel of his hand, pressing until wood accepts the lesson. He sprinkles a pinch of soot from the horn cup and rubs again. Wood darkens a tone, grows the look of a tool that will pass through snow with less argument. He holds it edgewise to the lamp. The light slides along the curve and tells him it is ready to join the other runners tomorrow. The child's mittens have dried enough to lose their heavy look. The woman squeezes each, not to test, but to teach fingers what dry should feel like tonight. She pulls on one mitten and holds her hands over the lamp, palms downward, feeling warmth gather at wrists and creep into the small bones. She breathes, turns her hands, and pulls the mitten off like a shell. The child will wake to comfort without needing to know why. A gentle side note: in dwellings where flame and breath travel slowly, preparation is less a list and more a music. You hum a little ahead of the melody so the next note has a place to sit. The man measures lamp time by his own quiet task, mending the edge binding on a drum frame. He lays the circle on his lap. It's skin tight as a thought, and tightens the rawhide lacing at 3 points, then the 3 between, then the spaces again. Evenness grows by triangles. He disdains hurry as one disdains a draft. When the lacing lies right, he sets the drum aside without tapping. Night does not need rhythm tonight, warmth has its own. They speak about tomorrow in pieces. If the sky clears, he will check a line and look for a seal's breath hole out past the small ridge where the wind lays snow like folded cloth. If wind decides otherwise, he will sharpen bone points, comb out the dog's coat, examine the sled's lashings. She will finish the boot, boil water with a pinch of herbs, and begin a hood that needs a fur border turned with hair inward for one person and outward for another. The lamp flickers once as if taking notes. At the edge of the room sits a small stack of flat stones. The woman lifts one and sets it near the lamp. On it she lays a strip of sinew to dry and remember straightness. Later, the strip will be rolled and tucked It will meet a needle with less argument because it learned tonight how to behave. The lamp warms the stone just enough to be a tutor. A gentle side note: stones in such rooms are partners, not furniture. They store heat, hold pots steady, teach ribbons and cords their duty. They ask little only that you remember who warmed them and who needs them next. The man opens a pouch and draws out a seal tooth carved into a small pendant. He runs a scrap of line through its hole and knots it without ceremony. The child will have something to hold when walking begins again in longer hours. He holds the tooth to the lamp, turning it so light finds the curve and the traced lines cut last summer at a driftwood table. He sets it near the child's head and smiles because the room is full of promises that do not ask to be spoken. They rest a while, doing only that. The lamp's flame salutes the pause by remaining absolutely itself, no taller, no shorter. Air near the floor cools a breath. Air at the level of hands stays friendly. Outside, an invisible fox writes careful steps across the crust, each step a hollow note in the band of snow. Inside, the needle lies still, the spoon sleeps, the kettle dreams. When the pause has refreshed their seeing, the woman lifts a small bag. Inside is the wick moss for tomorrow, bundled in measures. She counts with her thumb, rather than with numbers: 1 length for morning light, 1 for midday mending, 1 for the hour after chores, 2 for the long rope of evening. And a spare that looks like generosity, and is truly prudence. She closes the bag and sets it under the shelf away from wandering sparks that do not visit in such careful rooms. The man stirs the kettle, not to change anything, but to remind himself that he tends as much as he makes. He pours a little into a cup and leans the cup near the lamp to steal a breath more warmth. He drinks and feels the small river move through him, then sets the cup down on the flat stone with a sound the lamp alone would notice. A gentle side note: cups and stones exchange quiet favors all winter. Stone offers steadiness. Cup offers moisture back to the room before it ever reaches a mouth. When the art tilts again, she trims the wick a whisper lower. The flame accepts and grows a smaller halo, a sign that the room is ready to turn toward sleep. He moves the finished runner piece and the drum ring to the cool margin. The child shifts, sighs, and sleeps the next stretch with a sound like a small wave laying itself down. The lamp breathes the same syllable. Outside, the night is larger than any house can hold. Inside, the lamp keeps 1 leaf of that night tame. It will be enough until the next tending, enough for hands to finish what they began, enough for a family to remember that warmth is not only heat, but attention shaped by care. Toward the long center of night, the lamp and the room grow more alike. Each keeps a quiet shape. The woman reaches for a pouch of small, bright things, beads cut from bone and tiny discs of shell rubbed smooth on stone. They clink like distant ice. She threads them onto that cord to Ejehud made for a cousin who walks farther than most. The beads are not for decoration alone. They weight the edge so wind thinks twice. She lifts the cord near the light, and pale circles catch a tame shimmer before resting again in her lap. The man minds a different edge. He turns a handle that spins a short drill ball. Its point, a sliver of bone seated in wood, kisses a pilot hole in a sledge crosspiece. He leans only as much as is needed, drawing the bow with even strokes. A faint dust rises, dry and clean as new snow. He stops, clears the flake, and turns the crosspiece so his next hole will mirror the first. Matching, not measuring, keeps the frame true. When he's satisfied, he rubs a breath of oil into the wood, working it with his palm until it learns a darker calm. A gentle side note, in small rooms, symmetry is a kind of courtesy. Pairs of holes, twin seams, mirrored knots, these choices make later repairs easier and teach the eye to rest. The kettle murmurs again. She sets a spoon across its lid so it will not rattle if water pretends to hurry. Steam clouds the ladle once, then drifts into the room's slow wind. She takes down a little bundle wrapped in CO bladder, summer sorrel, dried crisp. A pinch in the cup changes hot water to something that tastes like a soft green thought. She lets it sit and then sips. The face she makes is not displeasure. It is the face people wear when a useful thing tells the truth. The child turns and finds the bead cord with a hand in sleep, then lets it go, fingers remembering the weight without waking. A dog reshapes its curve and noses fur to fur. The man checks the lashings that hold the ceiling frame, moving his eyes more than his hands. He presses one knot with a thumb and feels it answer. The knot was made in dry weather. Tonight's moisture has given it a new conversation. He readies it in a way that will forgive thaw and freeze without argument. He brings the lamp a small favor, a trim dish carved from antler. Into it he spoons a little oil to have at hand, so the vessel's rim need not be disturbed by every feeding. Tools in a near circle around the flame spare steps and keep the body's heat inside clothes where it belongs. The woman thanks him by not saying anything. She eases a drop along the wick's path, then pinches the outer edge with a quick wet touch so the small crown of yellow returns to a sober blue. A mild aside, hands learn a scale of fire the way singers know notes. There is a flame for drying, a flame for softening, a flame for sitting still. The qulliq plays them without hurry. She sets aside beadwork for a stretch and reaches for the boot that learned a new seam earlier. With a bone folder she presses along the line, convincing it to lie down and behave like the skin around it. She scrubs the surface with a twist of snow to lift loose grit, then rubs in a whisper of fat until the leather gleams the way healthy skin does. She cradles the boot heel near the heat far enough that warmth speaks, but does not command. At the lamp's farther side, a narrow tray holds oddments. Driftwood pegs, a thorn needle saved from a summer fish camp, to tiny stones the child declared lucky, a scrap of braided hair. The woman tidies this small country with 2 fingers. She lines the pegs in order by length, sets the thorn in a sleeve of paper, returns the stones to the place where light finds them at dawn. Quiet order prevents loud searching. The man draws a length of plaited cord and checks the splice where 3 strands became one. He rolls the join under the heel of his hand, feeling for any bump that would complain under load. He lifts the cord to the lamp, reading shadows to find errors a palm might miss. Nothing asked for correction. He coils it flat, pats the coil so it will remember not to tangle, and weights its edge with a smooth stone. A gentle side note, flat coils are diplomacy with rope. You solve tomorrow's knots tonight. The room's breath cools near the floor, near the lamp, air keeps its softer shape. She slides a low plank a hand's width closer so boots and mittens will share that temper. On the plank sits a little figure carved from fossil bone. Its face is just a few lines, but the lines know what a face must say at night. The child set it there once, and no one moved it. The figure watches in the uncomplicated way carved things do, content to hold light and give nothing back except good company. She lifts the wick with the needle's blunt back to see how it sits on the rim. Moss is still stout, oil travels kindly. She tucks a fresh sprig under the old, never replacing, always adjoining, so the flame crosses without complaint. This small grafting happens several times a night, a change so gradual that only the hands keeping watch notice. The stone keeps its warmth, and even pull the size of a palm. The man opens a pouch of steel needles, a rare luxury wrapped in braid, and hides it again after counting without counting. He is not miserly. He is careful with tools that turn winter into clothing. He gives the bone needle a quiet polish on a scrap of fat as if in apology for talking to steel. They share a piece of dried fish softened over steam, tearing with teeth and passing with a thumb. No plates. No waste of heat. The lamp's edge glitters in the fish oil, and she wipes it with the back of a spoon so the glitter does not become soot. The child shifts and murmurs something about the color of summer water. Neither adult corrects the dream. From above the lamp, thin patterns of residue trace the year. The marks are tidy, a pale smoke map that understands restraint. In spring, when light grows long, someone will scrape the ceiling smooth with a spatula of driftwood and start the writing again. The room keeps its own calendar where anyone can read it. He checks the sled runner propped at the wall by laying a string along its curve and squinting where light shows between line and wood. Satisfied, he slides it to the cooler margin and places a small wedge under one end so the curve will not forget itself during sleep. He places the wedge by touch more than by sight. He has set wedges under thousands of things. All of them listened. A gentle side note: wedges are librarians of shape. They file curves and edges exactly where they should wait. The woman reaches for the pouch of tomorrow's wick lengths to add one more spare. Not superstition, simply habit that became wise. She counts by texture. This piece has more twig. That one will want a slower flame. She chooses to medium braids and tucks them where her hand will find them without light. She turns the lamp a thumb's breadth, redistributing favor, and places the kettle again so warmth speaks evenly. He lays the drum ring flat and, with a finger, draws a line of soot mixed with fat across the inner circle where hands will rest during songs. The mark is not decoration. It teaches skin where to help the sound. The ring shines when the mixture dries. He does not test the voice. Rhythm lives elsewhere tonight. Their talk thins to gestures. He shows her the clean hole in the crosspiece. She shows him the smooth seam at the boot's ankle. Approval travels in small nods. The lamp's flame narrows a fraction, as if making room for sleep to sit down among them. Outside, Aurora threads may be walking the sky. Inside, their own green light is a cup of moss that decides how bright to be. She pinches the wick lower. The flame answers with a shy, obedient leaf. He moves the boots 2 handspans back, showing tomorrow's feet that they are expected. The dog sighs a second time deeper. Before they turn toward blankets, she lifts the horn cup of soot and tips a breath of powder into the little dish of fat. With a stick she mixes until gray turns to deep black. She writes a small mark on the backside of the boot, a sign only this house reads that says which foot it prefers. He smiles. This is the kind of literacy that makes rooms gentle. Finally, She lowers her hands. He draws the kettle off the stones, setting it on wood that does not mind a damp ring. The lamp holds steady for a last minute so eyes can memorize where things lie: needle here, spoon there, cord by the stone, all asleep near the cup. Memory is a path you walk safely in the dark. The child's breath steadies into the long, quiet hill of night. The room invites sleep by example. The lamp remains awake, but smaller now, less a circle, more a comma, ready to pause with them and resume when tending calls. Snow thinks it's cold thoughts outside. Inside, warmth is not an accident. It is a set of decisions, renewed a dozen times before dawn. The hours near morning are the quietest. The lamp has learned the night's lesson and keeps a low, obedient leaf. The woman wakes before a clock would claim it is time, woken by the small instinct that runes trust. She touches the wick with two damp fingers. A tiny sound, not quite a hiss, answers. Flame steadies. She feeds in a finger length of moss at the far edge so light will favor the drying boots for a while. The kettle receives one spoon of snow, steam lifts as if in greeting, and lays a soft veil against the lamp's curve. A gentle side note, tending at this hour is more reassurance than task. The keeper has already done the work. Hands now confirm that care has not forgotten anyone. She sits and listens to the house speak in single syllables. A drip from a mitten's cuff lands on the plank and evaporates before it gathers company. A fiber in the wick flares a speck, then remembers humility. The dog breathes 2 counts deeper, then returns to the long, even road of sleep. The child turns, presses cheek to blanket, and takes the warmth like a message read and saved. The man wakes in stages. He finds the lamp first with his ears, then with the skin along the back of his fingers. He pushes the covers back a patient hand's width and tastes the air fresh, not sharp, warm, not heavy. He sits, ties a thong at his ankle, and pulls on a sock that remembers his heel. He reaches for the runner wedge near the wall and checks it without looking. It has kept faith. He slides the wedge forward half a finger so the curve will be ready for morning planing. She opens a small box and lifts a packet wrapped in hide hair commons saved from a season of lining hoods. She twists them into a soft cord, dampened at the tip with her own breath, and tucks the cord through the seam of a child's cap as a hidden comfort. No one will know it is there except the person who feels less alone on a hard day. She nods once, not to herself, but to the older hands that taught this kindness. On the shelf, the bundle named Early offers 1 crowberry, swollen now on last night's water. She places it on a small dish and covers it with a scrap of hide so light will not steal the color. It will be a surprise at day's first cup, a reminder that the dark is temporary and seasons move even when people stay. The man trims the wick with quick wet pinches, then wipes a faint soot bead from the rim with the old seal fur twist. He adds a breath of oil from the antler dish, guiding the drop with the spoon's curve so it walks the stone's lip and disappears into usefulness. The flame replies in the same language it has used all night. Con work, no boasting. A gentle side note, language in such rooms is largely tactile. Stone understands oil. Moss understands pinches. Leather understands warmth. People speak through these translations and call it living. He checks the drum ring once more, laying a finger inside the circle to feel the line of soot-fatted grip. The skin is quiet. He turns away without tapping. He will ask the drum for sound when the sun has the courtesy to attend. For now silence is the song that holds the house together. She folds the sewing space with the same care used to unfold it. The bone all sleeps in its cloth roll. The bone folder slides into the pocket beside it. The needles, bone, and steel rest in their sleeves. She winds unused thread back onto the tiny spool, dampens its loose tail so it will not seek trouble, and sets the spool into the shell cup that keeps small order like a pond keeps sky. He gathers the lengths of line coiled last night and ties them into a soft bundle to loops, a tuck that gives with one pull, a knot that never remembers to be stubborn. The bundle sits on the plank where his morning hand will find it without asking anyone. He rubs the sled runner's face with the heel of his hand, listening with his palm for roughness. None announces itself. He lays a scrap of hide over the runner as if the wood might sleep better under a thin blanket. They warm their hands above the lamp, palms down, then turn them palm up for equal manners. Heat crawls into the wrists and travels toward the elbows. They do not rush it. The child's breathing drifts higher for to sighs, then settles again. The dog flicks an ear. The kettle lifts its lid the width of a reed and settles back with modesty. The woman pinches a tiny edge from the wick. The flame, which had grown a little proud, returns to its slender leaf. She places the small trimming into a shell dish to cool. Nothing goes onto the floor if it can go somewhere else. She pulls the boots from their near place and tests the leather's softness with 2 thumbs. She smiles into the seam new line, behaving as if it has always belonged. She sets the boots on the plank's cooler end, not far, only far enough to remember that dry things also like to rest. A gentle side note, the lamp does not merely dry and warm, it tutors. Objects leave its circle better at being themselves. He takes the horn cup of soot and tips the lightest breath into the antler dish where a ribbon of fat waits. He mixes with a stick until the paste becomes the black that writes clearly on pale woods. On the inside of the runner, where only the maker will see, he draws a small sign that marks which side of the sled it will live on. Not decoration, only a conversation between parts. The sign will be a comfort later, when the wind demands quick choices. Outside, the long cold begins its faint surrender. The sky has not brightened, but it has stopped insisting on being one color. The seam where roof meets night is a shade less absolute. He opens the entry a hand's width and allows a ribbon of air to practice being morning. The lamp narrows and then steadies unconcerned. It knows its work now, and its keeper is near. She lifts the little carved figure from the plank and cleans a tied line of soot from its head with the edge of her sleeve. The face returns, uncomprehending and content. She places it back where the child's eyes find it first when waking. That small meeting will tilt the day towards ease. He draws the kettle off the stones and sets it on the flat board that does not mind damp. He pours 2 cups water that tastes like heat and thin herbs and floats the crowberry in the child's cup, covering it again so discovery will belong to small hands. He drapes a strip of hide over each cup to keep steam kind and dust out. They look around the room as a single action. Tools accounted for. Lines coiled. Drying things turned. Stones warm, not greedy. Lamp fed, trimmed, clean. The house content. The woman slides the potch of wick lengths a finger deeper on the shelf and touches the smooth, egg-shaped stone that waits her morning note, a habit from other houses, honored here. A gentle side note: routines are the architecture of places that have little light. The brain rests when the hands know what lives where and why. She pulls blankets over the child's shoulder. The dog lifts its head and lays it down again without asking questions. He pinches the wick a last polite fraction so the oval becomes thinner, not sleepy, just respectful of the hour. The flame agrees and makes no smoke. They lie down again for the last small sleep before the day's first tasks. The lamp keeps their place. It watches the seam where ceiling meets wall, exactly as it has all night, exactly as someone taught it to. It dries a last mitten edge, finishes telling warmth to the binding of a hood, breathes evenly so air stays honest. When the first gray truly appears so faint it would escape a busy eye, the woman will lift the lamp and turn it toward the shelf where the morning begins. The man will sit and tie his thongs and stand the runner against the wall. The child will find a berry the color of summer and think the world made it in the dark. But for now the lamp holds one more minute of stillness and gives it away with grace. The qulliq is small, and it is enough. Its stone remembers every winter. Its wick learns how to become fire without becoming smoke. Its keeper's hands keep it in the shape of kindness. That is the whole of it. And as the lamp's gentle leaf of light yields to the first soft gray, let's travel quietly to a different room where warmth rises as steam. Abacus beads click like rain, and a bamboo ledger waits open. The teahouse in Song-dynasty lin'an. The city sleeps with one ear open. Lin'an's lanes hold the last cool of night in their stones. Before shutters lift and cellars sing, a narrow courtyard receives its first broom strokes. Bristles whisper over packed earth, fallen leaves travel in small, obedient eddies toward a jar by the gate. The teahouse sign, inked once with sure brush, now softened by years of steam, rests above the lintel. Inside, the room is square and modest, plank floor rubbed by 1,000 sandals, low tables with edges rounded by sleeves, a brazier that breathes as if it dreamed of clouds. At the back wall, the clerk lights the first charcoal. He leans close without hurrying, fans 3 breaths, and watches the ember change its mind about being dull. He sets a bronze kettle on a trivet, the lid clicks twice and then accepts the plan. Steam will find it later. For now, there is the gentle work of arrangement. From a drawer he brings the abacus wood frame, dark with oil, rods straight as bamboo in winter, beads rounded by decades of hands. He places it so morning light will touch its upper rail, the part he clears with the right thumb when closing a sum. Beside it he lays the day's ledger, bamboo slips bound with silk cord, the ends painted with a tiny vermilion dot so he will never stack them upside down. The brush rest, carved like a sleeping carp, waits near the inkstone. A gentle side note: city mornings are made of thousands of small beginnings. Kitchens, stalls, ferries, tea rooms, each lights a coal, sharpens a tool, lifts a shutter. The city is loud only later. At first it hums. He pours a cupful of water into the inkstone's shallow, moon-shaped well and sets the ink stick to its basin. The stick's end carries a gold character for fragrance, not because the ink smells sweet, but because someone's pride traveled with it. He grinds in slow ovals, wrist steady, feeling when the water thickens from clear to satin. He tests a stroke on scrap paper, a down that remembers breath at its end, a turn that stays narrow, a dot like the head of a sparrow. Satisfied, he wets the brush lightly and lays it flat on the rest so the hairs will not learn bad habits. He lifts a small-lidded basket woven of fine bamboo. Inside, cakes of tea pressed and dried, wrapped in paper brushed with a seal. He turns one in his hand and reads its weight without needing scales. The paper smells of clean cupboards and a little smoke. He sets the cake beside the kettle and leans a thin knife against it, a blade narrow as a bamboo leaf, meant to pry rather than to cut. From a covered pot he draws a pinch of pickled plum to ready a saucer, from a jar a spatter of sesame cakes. The trays remember where they belong on the shelf. His hands follow their memory more than his own intention. On the counter sits a scale whose pans can be fitted with weights that have tiny ears for lifting. He counts the brass pieces with quiet touch, not to suspect anyone, only because order is kinder to the mind than surprise. Against the far wall, a bead-curtained door divides room from kitchen. The beads keep steam in its lane and allow voices to travel without needing to be loud. He tests the curtain with his fingers. The beads answer with a soft cascade, the sound of promise that the day can begin. He wipes the abacus frame with a dry cloth. Two beads up, the rest down, not because any sum demands it, but because the sight of a ready tool is itself a form of calm. He flicks the top bead of the first rod, an old habit. The faint tap tells him the rod is true. He looks to the ledger and turns the first slip, a heading in thin hand date, whether a single character for peaceful, written by a senior who liked to mark mood as if it were cloud. The clerk smiles at that, though no one sees. A kettle sigh reaches the room's front. He lifts the lid and watches the smallest pearls rise, not boiled, just the breath water takes before talk. He tilts a rinse-over cups, 3 in a row. Steam polishes the glaze and wakes clay from its night. He empties the rinse into a basin so the warmth will not waste itself. He pries a leaf from the tea cake, then another, breaking along the compressed veins as if opening an old book. Tea dust clings to his thumb. He taps it into the caddy and closes the lid with his little finger, silent, practiced. A gentle side note for many shopkeepers: the first cup is not a drink but an offering to the day. The water is a messenger. The leaf is a letter folded well. Footsteps pass the gate. The clerk does not look up. He knows the measure of that stride. The first patron is a messenger who likes his tea pale and his accounts exact. The second will be a porter who counts coin buyer. The third, perhaps, a scholar who orders water twice before deciding he deserves the leaf. He moves 3 saucers to the front table and draws a thin line in the ledger where the day will begin. He reaches to a small shelf where charms sit, 3 coins tied with red cord, a brush cap carved like a bat for luck, a paper strip bearing a neat aphorism. He does not pray. He dusts them. Dust is democratic. From the kitchen behind the beads comes the scrape of a ladle, the tone of a pot whose bottom is thick. Someone hums the line of a market song with most of the words tucked away. He presses a pinch of sesame cakes into a paper twist, making it fat-bellied, a comfort for hands that don't want to count crumbs at the table. He sets a gourd scoop beside the water jar. Its lip shows a chip from last autumn that has not worsened. "Good," he says to no one. He tests the abacus with a pretend string of coins. 1 rod for 5s, 1 for 10s. Beads rise like dew, fall like rain. The sound is small but specific. Wood on wood, a soft clack that makes minds ready for agreement. He clears the frame with a sweep of his thumb along the top rail, one of those gestures that is as pleasurable as it is necessary. The cleared abacus is possibility made visible. The gate gives a mild creak. The messenger enters, bows like one line of a character, and sits by the window. He places a string of cash on the table, copper coins with square holes, their edges rounded by 1,000 hands. The clerk weighs the string in his palm. Not enough to measure with the scale, just a few check. He sets the string down and flicks beads. Bead, bead, pause, bead. 2 cups and a rinse, the messenger says. 1 plum. The clerk nods, writes a small note on the slip, 3 characters with tails, as neat as descent, pours water over the leaf in a guilin. The lid's porcelain lip chimes against the bowl, polite, like a neighbor tapping a gate post and walking on. A gentle side note, accounts can be songs when both sides enjoy rhythm. The abacus supplies meter, the brush writes melody, coins keep time. The porter arrives next, shoulder cloth damp with dawn. He warms his hands over the kettle and smiles at the cup not yet poured. He places coins directly beside the ledger, as if showing faith. The scholar after him slides in like a brush stroke, making himself small so as not to disturb the early piece. He requests hot water and keeps it, gathering courage behind steam. The clerk moves between beads and brazier, between ledger and abacus, in steps that know their distances. Steam veils, then clears. Brush tip wets and writes, a mark for cups, a mark for sweets, a small dot for the coin string that paid in advance. He keeps side notes you'd only understand if you worked here, rain in lane, flower vendor happy, east wind lazy. These phrases will mean prices later, and weather, and what to expect of roads. Morning finds its level. The kettle hums, the abacus waits, beads like patient birds on a wire. He rinses cups between pours, not rushing them into service, because clay, like people, prefers to be worn before being asked to do much. The room smells of steam and roasted leaf, of wet sandalwood from the pillars, of sesame that thinks about being sweet without deciding to be dessert. Outside, a hawker begins to chant the virtues of pears. Inside, the first suns are small and exact. Beads slide and stop and slide again. The day, at last, has opened its ledger. The room grows a little brighter by remembering how morning usually behaves. Steam braids itself into the light and then disappears. The clerk's hands learn again the quarter between brazier and table. Between ledger and abacus, he keeps sleeves tight with a simple knot so cloth won't dip into cups. The knot is a kind of promise between cotton and tea. He tilts the guilin and pours a pale stream into a fairness cup, then shares it into 2 small bowls for the messenger. The first pour is light, like a greeting. The messenger warms his fingers on the bowl and drinks with eyes half closed, as if listening to the tea rather than tasting it. The clerk twists paper around a pickled plum and lays it beside the bowl so the salt sour will walk with the leaf and not step on it. The abacus beads click twice, 2 cups and then fall still, waits open. A gentle side note, in houses of tea, counting is not suspicion, it is choreography. Numbers move so hands can rest. The porter's coins come next, laid out as a modest parade. The clerk gathers them into a string through their square holes. Thumb and forefinger working like a shuttle, he counts by 5s as beads jump, 1 bead up. To Don, pause. The porter orders the stronger water for his first cup, and the softer for the second, a kindness to a stomach that began work before dawn. The clerk writes a note on the bamboo slip to swift characters that mean porter usual. Habit becomes a currency of its own. He moves a small dish of sesame cakes to the scholar, who nods without looking up. The scholar's brush case lies on the table, its silk faded where many mornings rested on it. He opens the latch and touches the brush as one might greet a shy friend, then does not take it out. Steam gives him a reason to wait. At the far corner, a delivery of firewood leans against the wall in neat thirds. A boy from the back room shifts the stack by handspan, letting air fold between logs so they will dry without sulking. He listens to the clerk's counting and tries to move in time, not because anyone asked, but because rhythm makes labor less lonely. The clerk notices, and does not smile fully, only the inside of the mouth lifts. From the courtyard comes apricot-colored cat who owns no one. It walks under the bead curtain at ankle height and circles the brazier, tail shaping itself like a calligrapher's hook. The clerk taps his fingers against his knee, then lifts a small bowl from a shelf and sets a spoonful of water down where the floor remains cool. The cat reads the gesture, declines the bowl, and takes a seat on the warm boundary where steam decides to be air. A gentle side note: in city rooms, animals understand policies better than people explain them. Borderlines of warmth, spaces where feet go, puffs that bowls take all are obeyed when they are consistent. Rain begins the way it often does here without fuss. The courtyard's jar catches the first slant, then the steady fall. The bead curtain clicks more softly, the world's edges blur by a finger's width. The pillars smell more strongly of sandalwood with damp. The clerk moves a matte hand's pen away from the door to catch drips that splash under. He notes a tiny upward tick in the price of hot water in his mind, not to mark the ledger, only to expect a larger kettle later. He breaks another piece from the tea cake with the thin knife, placing shards into the caddy-like chips from a familiar roof tile. He passes his palm over the caddy's mouth to settle dust, then fits the lid so quietly it is a form of respect. He rinses the messenger's bowls and brews a second steep deeper now, color like the inside of a bamboo stem. The messenger counts coin with 2 hands and listens to the abacus, both sets of beads telling the same small truths. The porter dries his hands over the kettle and eats a sesame cake slowly, pinching crumbs so they do not practice escape. He places 3 coins on the table for the second pour and 1 on the ledger's corner for the water he will carry in his mouth on the walk, a private agreement between thirst and work. The clerk moves to beads for the tea and leaves the top bead resting for the extra coin until it decides where it belongs. A gentle side note: excess in these rooms is only another name for remainder. Remainders are promises for later. From behind the beads, the kitchen sends up 2 sounds: the hush of a ladle across the bottom of a pot, and the soft rhythmic tapping of a cook's knife, not hurrying, just telling lotus root to become slices. The clerk writes a small side mark on the bamboo slip, lotus noon, a hint to mention it to those who like its agreeable crunch. He writes in tiny script along the slip's edge where only he will read. A pair of artisans enter, rain shining on their shoulders. One holds his cap in the crook of his elbow, the other carries a roll of paper tied with twine. They choose a table by habit. The clerk fills their bowls, sets a twist of gingered melon rind beside them, and slides the abacus beads gently, 2 plus sweet. He weighs a string of cash for them and flips a bead upward to park a small debt that will go away by evening. They nod the way long customers nod, with a fraction of the head that says, "We will make a frame square if you keep our cups round." He wipes the abacus frame again, not to clean, but to feel the smooth wood that has learned 1,000 editions. He clears a sum with the top rail sweep and writes a line on the ledger, weighing 5 strings. 3 favors the last standing for the scholar's water, the porter's extra coin to be returned in sweets, the artisan's debt given a chair for a few hours. Bamboo slips breathe a little under the brush. They seem to approve. The scholar, warmed by steam, opens his case at last and lays out paper, inkstone, water dropper, and brush. He writes 2 characters slowly, both meaning quiet, one with a heart radical that nudges it toward peaceful. He sets the paper aside to dry. The clerk brings him a second rinse without being asked. The scholar touches the bowl with the back of his hand and returns the smallest bow, thanks recorded in the book of manners rather than the ledger. A gentle side note: some accounts are settled in temperature, silence, or proximity. A bowl at the right warmth is a coin. A pause at the right length is change returned. Rain thickens. Customers lean toward their bowls and away from the door. The cat moves to the warmest notch of air near the kettle's shoulder. The clerk shifts the kettle half a step to bring its whole base over the trivet-10-old trick to avoid impatient boa. He pries 2 more leaf flakes and opens a second gowan. 1 pour is destined for the porter's pocket bottle, a service that will make the next street shorter. A courier bursts to the threshold and stops as if a brush had lifted. He takes his hat off in the rain, composes his breath, then enters at the right size for the room. A string of coins clinks. The clerk weighs it and lifts the end of the string to dump water collected in the holes. The beads on the abacus jump 5, 10, 10 more. He slides 3 back when the courier orders only water and a sweet. The courier dries his hands over the brazier while reading the schedule pinned to the post-ferry Times, a boatman's note about a stubborn sandbar. He eats ginger as if it were a strategy. The clerk's brush writes small, obliging tales along the ledger side: how many rinses, who liked hot water only, who paid with a chipped coin that still deserved to count. He blows gently on the ink and dusts with a breath of dry tea dust, a restaurant trick, as old as his master's master. The line sharpens without smearing. The slip returns to the stack, red dot ends aligned. From the back, the boy appears with a bucket of cinders for the ash jar. He pours carefully so no bloom of gray rises to coat the room's tongues. The clerk checks the brazier with iron tongs, turns a coal that has decided to nap, and sets a thin new piece along its shoulder. Heat strengthens without glare. A gentle side note: heat is like money here. Enough is comfort, more than enough is waste. Far too much is trouble. The middle is an art. The messenger stands, gathers his string of coins, and leaves to under the saucer with the plung's paper twist, an old signal meaning send a boy for a parcel later. The clerk touches the coins with the back of a knuckle and answers the signal by turning 1 bead. Up in the far right column, the column for errands. The porter takes his pocket bottle and seals it with a rag twist. The scholar dries his brush with patient fingers, drawing it to a point as elegant as a crane's beak, and slides it back into the case, a small sigh closing the day's first paragraph. Rain keeps on with its dotted script across the courtyard. The room learns the rhythm and writes its own click of bead curtain, clack of abacus, hush of kettle, brush whisper on bamboo. The clerk wipes the counter not to clean, but to remind himself that he likes the look of a straight line. He checks the ledger's place, the abacus's clear rails, and the kettle's calm. The morning has declared itself balanced. By late morning the room has learned its path through rain. Footprints dry on the plank floor and then become the idea of footprints. The bead curtain moves less, Bibles time themselves between heavier sheets of weather. The clerk tilts the kettle to listen sound lower now, ready for a ladle of water. He adds from the jar in a thin ribbon to avoid scalding the charcoal. The kettle answers with agreeable breath. He rests the ink stick on the stone's bridge and refreshes the well with 2 drops from the water dropper. The dropper is porcelain, shaped like a small gourd. The hole at its top hums lightly when he presses the belly. He circles the stick, ovals, until the pool thickens back to satin. On scrap, he paints a single character that means clear, testing the brush's point. The stroke stands, as if with its own spine. A gentle side note: tools are not workers, they are colleagues. You visit them briefly, ask how they are, and they tell you in small ways weight, the way water behaves along their edges. 2 officials step in from the lane, robes damp at the hem, hats held level with a certain grace that comes from practice. They take the table under the bean and order water first. The clerk notes their presence without making a stage of it. He warms their bowls, sets a side dish of salted chrysanthemum stems, and lets steam be their introduction to the room. He moves beads on the abacus, but leaves a gap between tens, a trick to make larger sums easy to check at a glance. He will likely count more than cups for them, perhaps a side transaction for tea bricks to send upriver, perhaps the fee for a scribe who copies petitions. A porter returns with an empty shoulder frame, closed darker from rain. He exchanges 3 coins for a refill of hot water, and rests a moment at the brazier's margin, palms spread to the warmth, not to take, only to share. The clerk flips to beads and parks one in the errant column, again his private grammar for kindness is owed. The scholar has become braver. He requests leaf. The clerk pries fresh shards from the cake, places them in the gaiwan, and pours with a small circle so the water walks the leaves rather than knocks them. He tilts the lid to strain, then sips the first drop himself to test, as is custom, and tips the rest into the fairness cup. The scholar's first true cup is pale, like a path drawn in fog. He drinks slowly and writes the second quiet, the one with the heart radical. Again, this time the tail on the right flicks with confidence. At the doorway, a woman in a reed raincoat shakes off beads and reveals a tray of pastries wrapped against the wet, walnut crisps, sesame twists. A new thing with red bean that holds its shape bravely. The clerk buys a small plate of each, pays with coin, and with a warm paper cone of rinsed cups for her hands. She laughs into the steam and leaves 1 extra twist by accident. He does not correct the arithmetic. He moves 1 bead up in his favor's rail, the rightmost place where sons are never read aloud. A gentle side note: books keep coin, people keep warmth. Both must balance by dusk. The 2 officials ask about leaves of better grade. The clerk brings a tin with a lid that sings when lifted. He opens it away from the kettle so steam will not court the leaf too soon. They sniff and frown, and then nod, exactly in that order. He weighs out a small portion on the scale, the weights standing like squat chessmen along the pan's rim. He ties the tea into paper with string and presses a red seal on the knot. The abacus clacks a new rhythm, larger beads moving up the rods like cormorants stepping on a log. The ledger receives crisp characters, each placed as if it carried its own lacquer. The rain hesitates, then continues. The cat sleeps where warm air pulls one paw over nose. The boy from the back brings a fresh scoop of charcoal, black as a sentence not yet written. The clerk lifts the grating with iron tongs and lays a small piece at the brazier's shoulder. Flame thinks, then agrees. No smoke presumes to enter the room's grammar. He brews a darker second steep for the scholar and a very light one for the officials, who have changed their mind and prefer to keep heads clear. He pours water only for the porter, who nods thanks as if he were receiving a letter from a friend. The bead curtain swings. A boatman enters smelling of river rain and wet rope. His hands are raw in the creases. He cups the bowl so his palms can read the warmth's line. He pays with 2 chipped coins and a story about a sandbar that moved overnight. The clerk sets the coins aside without prejudice. Their roundness is on a stand right and west on the slip's margin, where tomorrow's boatmen will notice the word if they look. A gentle side note: good shops collect weather of all kinds, rain you can see, and the kind that lives in channels and schedules. That climate falls onto the ledger in small, precise drizzle. After the noon bell from far-off shrines more vibration than sound traffic loosens. The clerk uses the lull to tidy. He angles the tables a finger width so servers' pots feel natural. He straightens the bead curtain with one twist at the top. He wipes condensation from the window's paper with a cloth that does not shed. He opens the cash drawer not to count again, but to breathe. Money likes air. Strings of coins rest like tame snakes, each looped with a paper tag. Morning, lunch, errands, tea bricks. He closes the drawer softly so it will not remember being slammed and creak later in resentment. He takes out a thin wood tablet and marks stock. Tea cakes 5 of one grade, 3 of another, plums low, sesame cakes comfortable, ginger sufficient if the rain keeps people sensible. He adds lotus root to a chalk mark on the kitchen post and erases turnip, which ran out with the rain 2nd hour. The boy reads the marks out loud once under his breath, learning the room's private alphabet. The officials finish their water and wrap their sleeves with neat flicks that send drops toward the door. They carry away to paper parcels of leaf. The clerk bows small. The abacus beads drop some closed. He brushes a faint line across the ledger to seal the entry and dots it with the corner of his finger, a superstition inherited from someone who probably had very clean hands. The scholar, warmed and convinced, writes a 3rd character, listen, placing the ear-radical beside a door. He tells the clerk, with the smile only tea loosens, that the room makes that character. The clerk gestures toward the bead curtain, toward the abacus, toward the kettle. They taught me, he says softly, and returns to the brazier. A courier's boy arrives, hat to big, errands earnest. He presents a wooden token carved with the character the messenger left. The clerk rewards him with a paper parcel and a sweet twist balanced on top. The boy stands taller to keep the sweet safe from rain and from his own desire, and vanishes into the lane. The cat wakes one eye and approves this economy. A gentle side note: tokens travel faster than people and return with less complaint. Shops become post offices when trust is steady. Midday leans into afternoon. The rain lightens, and then finds itself again. A peddler of brushes stops to warm fingers, leaves behind a bundle for the scholar to examine later, 3 shafts of bamboo capped with goat, weasel, and hare. The clerk turns them gently, admiring the lashing where hair meets shaft. He returns the bundle to the peddler's sleeve with the kind of gaze that is already a purchase once the scholar nods. The kettle demands a more generous feed. He pours a longer thread of water into its mouth and listens for the pitch that says enough. He empties used leaf to the compost jar and fans the charcoal with a single folded paper card. Air brightens flame remembers its manners. He writes the afternoon heading on a fresh bamboo slip, rain holes, road slow, leaf good. He adds a tiny bat shape, as a private joke with himself, the pun for luck. The brush's tail flicks to a fine point and rests along the carp rest. The abacus sits quiet for a long breath, then clacks again when the porter returns for last water before the ferry closes. The clerk fills his bottle, ties the rag stopper tight, and tucks one more sesame twist in his palm without a ledger mark. The porter nods as if given good weather. Outside, a patch of brightness happens and then leaves, like a courtier who is late to everything. The room refuses to be fooled. It keeps to its measured chores, cups rinsed, leaves pried, coins counted by air, beads shifted by habit, ledger strokes even steam tidy. Drops on the jar by the gate make their own abacus against clay. 5, 10, 20, then a pause. The clerk parts the bead curtain and looks into the lane just long enough to see umbrellas like mushrooms and a dog sleeping under cart, dry as if it had bought a ticket. He returns to the counter and turns the abacus's top rail once more clear, ready. He glances at the stack of bamboo slips and places the last used one a little offset, his signal to copy entries to the bound book later, when dusk teaches patience a softer meter. Afternoon tilts the room into a slower key. The rain decides to be mist for a while, then remembers itself and returns to being rain. The bead curtain ticks like a patient clock. The clerk wipes the counter with a cloth that smells faintly of 2-leaf and clean wood, then sets the abacus at a friendlier angle for wrists that have worked since dawn. He clears the frame with a sweep along the top rail, possibility restored. A carpenter arrives with shavings clinging to his sleeves, curls of cedar perfuming the wet air around him. He places 2 strings of cash on the table and a small wooden box he wants to trade for tea, dovetailed corners, lid that slides with the hush of a secret. The clerk turns the box once, admiring the tidy fit, then weighs the coins in his palm. Beads climb and pause, ledger strokes follow. The clerk adds a half string from the house drawer to make the exchange even and ties the box with a paper band, pressing a red seal into the knot so ownership has a memory. A gentle side note: trades soften ledgers. When goods become tea without passing entirely through coin, rooms feel more like neighbors than counters. A woman with a basket of greens peers in, the ends of her hair jeweled with rain. She sells water spinach by the handful, roots clean, leaves bright as a good answer. The clerk buys a small bundle for the backroom supper and gives her a cone of hot water to wrap her fingers around. She warms, smiles with one half of her face, the ring cleans the other end, moves on, basket swinging like a punctuation mark. The scholar remains, writing characters in a column until they become almost breath. He tests the new brush a peddler left, the weasel hair point holding a line as thin as a whisper. The clerk brings him a 3rd steep, lighter, and a saucer of salted chrysanthemum stems that taste like a polite garden. The abacus beads tick twice. The ledger receives a note. Scholar 3 brush trial, weather friendly to ink, at the brazier. The boy turns to coals with tongs and sets the screen so flame will choose a middle path. The kettle answers with a soft, steady song. He raps the scoop's rim lightly against the ash jar, a rhythm that makes the cat lift its head, then decide to remain folded. The clerk watches the boy's hands and nods inwardly. Movements have learned to be square, pores level, turns small, no wasted steps. A courier returns with a damp scarf and a grin that apologizes for footprints. He orders only hot water and points at the errand bead the clerk left up on the far rod. The clerk slides it down. The debt becomes a cup, and the room grows a hair lighter, as if ledgers were lamps. He tears a slip of paper into a neat rectangle and writes a reminder in tiny hand token, return, sliding it under the top slip so he will see it at copying time. A gentle side note: memory needs furniture. Papers, beads, little red dots. These are chairs we set out for facts so they do not stand awkwardly in corners. The door beads part for a pair of musicians carrying a pipa and a shawl. Rain has delayed their engagement. They seek only warmth, then a small share of boiled water. The clerk gestures to a table and offers sesame twists. They tune as quietly as tuning can be, strings settling like sighs, flute testing one long note that fits the room as if the walls had been built around it. The abacus does not move for music, the ledger does, one slender mark for the gift of steam. At the side shelf, the clerk opens the tin of finer leaf for an elderly customer whose coin always arrives wrapped in old paper, bundled by a knot that aunties itself if you greet it gently. He pries a measured flake, folds it into fresh paper, and ties with cotton thread that does not cut. He presses a seal just hard enough to leave courage in the fibers. The old man places the parcel under his sleeve and warms his hands over the kettle, palms open to the mild flame as if praising an honest fire. The rain tires and becomes a rumor. The courtyard smells of wet clay and sandalwood and the faint iron of coins. The clerk tips the kettle. The pitch lowers. He pours a longer thread from the water jar and sets the lidded jar to watch the breath return. He empties spent leaf to the compost jar. A steam ghost leaves the guywan and vanishes where cool air rules. Two students arrive talking about examination phrases as if they were stepping stones on a river. They order strong tea and request a square of the cleanest paper to test a couplet. The clerk finds a sheet without speck or grain and lays it on a board beside their table, a place where sleeves will not bruise it. He turns the abacus to beads up and makes a diagonal dot on the ledger, private sign for paper issued. The students bow to the sheet as if bowing to an examiner, then to the clerk, who pretends not to see. A gentle side note: shops become schools when paper crosses tables and ink dries in company. The boy returns with a basket of lotus root from the back, slices like coins with holes, pale and crisp. He places a plate on the counter for the clerk's supper and one discreet serving on the scholar's table, which the scholar accepts with a nod reserved for small perfections. The clerk moves a bead upward on the favor's rod. The books must know what the heart already knows. Late light finds the window and leans in, turning the rain's last threads to wire. The bead curtain makes a different sound when weather lifts, a higher clatter, a little more careless. The clerk shifts the tables a finger's width again to make the room read more spaciously now that damp coats are leaving. He straightens the charms on the shelf without faith, with affection. A clerk from the shop next door slips in and whispers about a small counterfeit coin circulating on this lane thin at the rim. Sound wrong. Our clerk nods, drops a bead to mark the warning, and rings to coins on the scale pan to rehearse the true note. It is a modest, confident chime, easy to remember. He will count by air a shade more intently for the next hour. Not suspicion, just listening. He copies the early ledger entries to the bound book that lives under the counter. Brush strokes go slower toward evening. Even when the hand is young, the room's longer breath enters the wrist. He adds weather notes in the margin, rain held then softened, river running fat, very late. Tomorrow's prices for water and sesame will behave differently if this line survives to morning. The musicians, warned, play one brief tune before leaving a melody with few notes and good spaces. The room seems taller by one beam when they finish. The clerk bows with the chin, thanks neither charged nor free. He slides to beads for the sesame twists they did not pay for, then leaves the sum as it is, a ledger's kind of applause. A gentle side note, the better sort of accounting admits music, time, and weather as cosigners. Shadows from the brazier grow longer on the boards. The scholar packs his case with care, brush tip coaxed to a neat beak, water dropper dried with a corner of sleeve. He pays slowly, counting a string's worth twice, as if it were a courtesy to the clerk rather than caution. The clerk beats beads, not hurried, closing the sum with the soft sweep he enjoys so much. As dusk makes a first suggestion at the door, the clerk tiddies for evening, cups grouped in fives, fresh leaf pinched, and ready in a caddy for the hours to come. The abacus wiped, and turned so the lower bead sits snug against the reckoning bar, waiting. He tightens the top knot at his sleeve, a sign to himself that the day has entered its gentler chapter. The boy brings a small oil lamp to set near the ledger. The flame is recession, not announcement. The kettle hums in a tone that would be called green if kettles could be assigned colors. Outside, wheels tick over stones. Inside, the cat performs a long stretch that tells the bones a new watch has begun. The clerk writes one last heading. Toward dusk, coins honest, rain done. He sets the brush down with its tail aligned to the carp rest and knocks the abacus once lightly with his knuckle, a custom that persuades beads to sleep straight. Evening is arriving through the bead curtain in small, golden squares. Evening takes its seat without asking for introductions. The oil lamp by the ledger gives a modest circle, smaller than day but content. The brazier's red breath deepens. Outside, carts slow. Inside, conversations thin to slopes and pauses. The clerk ties back the bead curtain with a loop of string so it will murmur, rather than chatter, when a late customer enters. He straightens the abacus once more to beads up, 3 down along the first rod's his favorite idle constellation. A gentle side note, rooms remember their keepers by the diagonals they prefer. Some tilt cups in 3s, some stack slips in 4s. The small patterns make a signature no brush ever writes. A pair of bookbinders arrive with paste still sweet on their sleeves. They order hot water first, leaf second, and open their parcel only enough to let glue fumes leave politely. The clerk pours from the fairness cup, the stream thin as a line drawn by a sure brush. He slides to beads and parks a third in his favors column when one binder admits a purse has misplaced itself. Settle tomorrow, the clerk says, and the ledger agrees in a small tail flick. The boy sweeps the floor with strokes that begin at the door and close near the ash jar, teaching dust the same path every night. He empties the compost of used leaf to the garden urn in the courtyard, rain having finally loosened to a polite mist. A neighbor laughs in the lane. The sound carries a memory of wine in wet sandals. The cat performs its appointed rounds, checking corners for misfiled warmth, and then returns to the kettle's safer border. The clerk copies notes from the day's bamboo slips to the bound book whose lacquered covers reflect the lamp as a golden comma. He writes in smaller hand now, each character a little more deliberate. Rain kept fairies late. A counterfeit rumor with thin ring. Lotus root popular, order more. Musicians warmed, tune soft. He pauses above the page and adds a weather mark he learned from an older clerk. A tiny fish to mean river high, useful to boatmen who read the book for signs as much as for sums. He checks the strings of cash, dividing them into loops that sit flat in the drawer. Coins make a rounder sound at night, as if relieved of being arguments. He tests two with a light tap. The true ring answers with calm confidence. He returns the strings to their compartments. Tea, water, sweets, leave to carry, then closes the drawer with a patient hand. So wood and metal will keep courtesy tomorrow. A gentle side note. Closing tasks are woven to protect opening tasks. Night is a bridge, not a wall. A scribe from a nearby stall steps in with sleeves tucked high to keep ink from telling secrets it shouldn't. He orders hot water only and rests his hands around the bowl like someone warming a story. The clerk asks about ferry schedules in a tone that is neither curious nor indifferent. The scribe says a sandbar moved. The west boat will push off later than honesty prefers. The clerk nods, moves a bead on the far rod his silent note carried, and writes west late in the bound book's margin. The boy brings out a plate of lotus root for the back table where the two bookbinders have softened into long backs and easy breaths. The clerk takes one slice and sets it on the scholar's napkin where he left his case earlier, a small joke with an empty chair. He eats a slice standing, flavor clean and crisp, and keeps the lamp in the corner of his eye, the way keepers do. The last brightness on the window paper lets go. Night is fully itself. The clerk lays a fresh layer of charcoal along the brazier's shoulder, not center, so heat climbs rather than leaps. The kettle, now a deeper voice, lulls rather than summons. He turns the abacus and clears the frame with his favorite motion, the thumb sweep along the top bar that feels like tidying the sky. A late customer steps in, hat on, removes it as if the hat were grateful. He is a carver of seals, his fingertips stained with cinnabar. He buys a small parcel of better leaf for a client, pays with coin true and sound, and tells a story about a miscut radical that turned longevity into long broom. They laugh in the quiet way rooms laugh after dusk, shoulders more than mouths. The clerk seals the parcel and stamps it once, a square mark with straight borders, and a small bat in one corner. The carver approves the impression, not the design, and vanishes with the rain. The ledger now holds the day's shape from corner to corner. The clerk runs his palm over the pages, not touching ink, only letting the book's slight warmth tell him the story is finished. He lays a paper slip, his tomorrow bookmark, under the top string of coins and writes on it, rinse first, leaf low, lotus early, watch for thin ring. He slides the slip under the smooth stone kept for this purpose, a river pebble that always looks a little wet. A gentle side note, Tomorrow begins in the last 5 minutes of today. Shops that sleep well open well. He lifts the scholar's forgotten napkin and folds it to keep dust from learning its corners. He squares the tables by aisle, lining each leg with a floorboard seam, making pots that feet prefer in morning light. He rinses the cups a final time in warm water only, and sets them upside down on their towel so clay will breathe overnight. He wipes the abacus frame and leaves it turned sideways, his signal to himself that suns are resting. The boy gouses the small oil lamp near the door with a cap that fits neatly. The flame dies without complaint. The clerk leaves the ledger lamp alive a little longer. He stands at the threshold and listens. Lane settled, river distant, a vendor's last call swallowed by damp. He takes down the signboard and leans it just inside, cloth between lacquer and wall so both will remain friends. He closes the bead curtain without tying it, a promise that morning will not find knots where none are needed. He lifts the kettle off the trivet and sets it on wood to cool, careful that the base does not scorch the counter's patience. He brushes ash toward the jar in 3 slow swirls, spiraling labor into rest. A gentle side note: shutting a room is a ceremony of gratitude performed in gestures the room understands. He bows not to gods, not exactly, but to arrangements, to kettle, abacus, brush, ledger, beads. The boy mirrors the bow with the economy of youth. The cat yawns, which is also a kind of bow. They step into the lane, pull the door to the angle that keeps air honest, and let the night take the room back into its quieter alphabet. Rain has become a fine thread. Lanterns elsewhere wear soft halos. The clerk turns once to see the windows rectangled into a mild square, then walks home with the light bundle of a day that balanced. In the bound book under the counter, the fish mark for river high dries to a precise black. On the abacus, beads rest against the reckoning bar with the serenity of pebbles in shallow water. The teahouse sleeps, but its arithmetic continues in sympathetic places: kettles that will hum again, coins that will ring true or not, umbrellas drying against walls, hands remembering the weight of cups. Morning will find the room ready to write another quiet sum. And as evening folds the last page of ledgers and clicks the abacus to silence, we'll step gently from bead curtain to shade cloth, from steam to dusted cacao, into a great market where value is counted by beans in cords, where a steward's calm hands keep trade moving like breath. Before the sun decides to be bright, the market is already awake in its bones. Tlatelolco's broad square lies quiet and almost blue. Shade cloths hang like gentle sails, tied corner to corner, still for now. Stone slabs that will be heated by noon keep the night's last cool on their surfaces. Footprints from yesterday have been brushed away with palm brooms. The ground begins as an even page. At the edge of the square, under a mat roof, the measuring steward opens his storage basket. He works without rush, letting the morning's cool behave like a second pair of hands. First, the painted boards, slim planks marked with simple signs: 20, 100, 400. The marks are not numbers the way a scribe draws them, but they speak as clearly to buyers and sellers. He sets the boards in a tidy row, ends aligned, paint facing outward so no one needs to guess. Next come the cord bundles, braided fibers looped in quiet, regular circles. Each loop tells a count without needing a voice. He slips them over a peg and lets them hang like sleeping snakes. Beside them, to gourd cups with lips worn soft by use, a scoop made from a cut calabash, and a reed pen laid into a wrap of cloth rubbed with soot and a little plant oil. The pen's tip is a narrow wedge, patient and precise. He spreads a woven mat and sits with his knees easy. The low table in front of him is a plank set onto short stones. Its surface bears the polished marks of many arguments resolved by agreement. A small jar of black pigment waits with its lid half-turned. A square of cotton keeps dust out and curiosity down. The steward lifts the lid and checks. The paste has not dried overnight. He moistens the reed with a breath and draws one short line on a palm leaf scrap, dark, even, obedient. He nods and closes the jar again. A gentle side note: markets wake like schools. First, the chalk and slate, the pens and paper, then the lesson. The steward's tools make talk possible. Vendors begin to arrive from every spoke of road. Baskets ride hips and heads. Cloaks are folded back, sandals dusty from the causeways. The earliest are the bean sellers' cacao, carried in woven sacks that smell of dust and a faint bitter sweetness. The steward touches a sack with the back of his hand, not to test the count, just to read the night's air in the fibers. Dry is a kind word at market. He lays a painted board on the mat. It bears the mark for 20, a small cluster of dots taught to children and merchants alike. He pours from the gourd scoop until beans cover the mark and make a neat pile. The sound is the market's first music, a muted rattle, like rain remembered under thatch. He levels the mound with the flat of his hand. The skin on his palm recognizes honest beans by how they shift, slim, oval, faintly ridged, weight that speaks without performing. A woman sets down her basket gently. She sells cacao by the hundred, and she prefers a count that others can see. The steward moves the 100 board beside the 20 and fills it 5 times, each pile laid just so, then scrapes the beans together with the side of his hand and lets them fall into her basket. He ties a loop on one of the hanging cords, one loop for 100, simple as that. He lifts the reed pen and makes a single stroke on his palm leaf scrap. The stroke is not for price. It is for memory, in case anyone needs to review the path these beans took this morning. A gentle side note: not every tally wants to live forever. Some want to live only until noon. The cloth sellers arrive, necks, mantles folded, edges trimmed clean. They count cacao as payment too, and their eyes practice the same reading. The steward keeps them waiting just long enough to finish one tip of the scoop. He does not multitask. He layers. He turns to them and lays out the 20 board again, then the 400, a mark that customers like to see when larger trades happen, because big numbers come when they find a home on wood. A youth brings a small tray of tamales wrapped in leaves and sets it near the steward's mat with a smile that hopes, not demands. The steward buys one with good beans from a small pouch tied at his waist. He pays in 20s because the youth's fingers count better in small units. He eats in tidy bites between scoops. The tamal is soft and quiet, and the steam feels good in the morning's lungs. He tests a handful from a new basket the way he always does, a casual pour into his palm, a slow listen to the rattle. False stones clack differently, broken beans whisper. He spots a few light shells, empty of meat, and picks them out with 2 fingers. He does not accuse the seller. He sets the shells aside and adds 2 true beans to the basket to keep the world straight. The seller watches and nods, relieved to be corrected by courtesy and not by show. Shade cloth catches a small wind and lifts, then settles again. Light walks through its net and reels itself back. The square fills with ordinary spectacle. Flower sellers laying marigolds like small suns. Potters setting bowls upright on mats. A tinker with a bundle of copper bells that sound like tiny, well-behaved birds. The steward hears this, but the beans remain his weather. He keeps the scoop moving at a pace that never looks like labor. In a hurry, he turns occasionally to the reed pen. A vendor asks to buy the 100 with a fragment of cotton cloth and the rest in beams. The steward writes a short sign on the leaf scrap cloth symbol, 1 count mark. Then a small line for beans so that when they return with the cloth he will not test memory against memory and call it per. Poof. He tucks the scrap under a smooth stone and keeps the pen within reach. A gentle side note: markets prefer witnesses who weigh little. Palm leaf scraps, a stone or reed pen enough to keep peace. Under the next shade, two men dispute the price of a mantle with a fine border. Their voices climb a terrace, then remember to stay in the valley. The steward glances over. He does not leave his mat. Instead, he lays the 20 board where both can see. Pours a measure for one and a measure for the other, and waits. They look at the piles, measure them with their eyes the way one measures a path by steps, and then find a number between pride and need. The steward tips the agreed count onto the seller's mat and returns to his beams. A little order has slid back into place without any speeches. He pauses to drink a mouthful of water from his gourd flask. The water tastes like clay and cool shadows. He sets the gourd in a ring of woven reed to keep it from wandering. A small child, hand in an ants, stops to watch the scoop. The steward tips 3 beans into the child's palm, and the child's face learns a new smile that includes commerce, but remembers kindness. Sun warms the cloth above. The market begins to speak louder, though its words are still rhythm more than call. Drums at the far end beat a phrase that keeps time for porters. A runner moves through the crowd with a message bundle tied neatly, body turned to fit gaps, sandals quiet. The steward's hands stay at their precise work: scoop, level, pour, tie a loop, make a mark. Beans move as if they wanted to agree with him. He turns a board over and brushes it with his palm, feeling for any grit that might confuse a count. The paint on its face holds steady. The edges are smooth. He stacks the 20 on the 100 on the 400, a neat tower he can open quickly. He closes the pigment jar and rubs the reed pen clean on a rag that carries the history of such rubbings in quiet, dark streaks. A gentle side note: the steward's work is not to judge value. It is to give value a place to stand while buyer and seller decide who sits. By the time the sun reaches a line on the temple wall, the mark he uses in his head for morning's middle, his mat has seen many small transactions pass, and none stick to it. A woman with flowers brings him a loop of marigolds in thanks for settling a dispute 2 days ago. He accepts and sets the loop around the smooth stone, a wreath for fairness. The air smells briefly of clean calendar, the way flowers smell when they open exactly on time. He eats the last bite of tamal and brushes his fingers together carefully so no grease reaches the boards. He touches the cord bundles, counting loops by feel. They answer 100, 2, 3, 4. His day has a spine now. He breathes once, not deeply, just enough to reset shoulders, and pours the next measure. The square wakes fully. Voices weave. Shade cloth flickers. The steward's small domain keeps its quiet grammar. Cacao beans rattle, settle, and move on. The reed pen rests. The painted boards wait to be useful again. The market has begun. By mid-morning, shade cloth begins to breathe. It lifts and settles like a sleeping chest. The steward adjusts his met to follow the traveling edge of shadow, a handspan at a time, so the boards remain readable to eyes that prefer cool. He wipes the 20th plank with the heel of his palm and listens to its smooth answer, a faint dryness that means no oil will catch dust today. A woman approaches with a woven basket tight as a drum. She is known for honest beans and for mantles whose borders keep their pattern after many washings. Her basket holds cacao measured yesterday and tied with cord in clever knots that announce their counts without needing witnesses. Still, custom likes to be saluted. The steward lays the 100 board and pours, scoop after scoop, letting the mound rise a finger above the mark. He levels it with the side of his hand until beans lie even as a field after rain. He ties a loop on the cord for each 100 and sets a small 20 to one side, her bonus for arriving early, the square's quiet discount. She nods as if the sun had arranged it. A gentle side note: markets reward the first hour with manners as much as with price. Early feet earn lighter sums and easier seats. Two youths follow with smaller baskets, beans chattering at a higher pitch. The steward tests a handful from each. In one, a few shells present themselves as weight. He picks them out with 2 fingers and returns them without scorn. The youth blushes because error is different from trick. In the other basket, a rattle feels true. The steward pours onto the 20 and then onto the 100, moving beans like water, no drama. He ties loops, sets a reed mark on the palm leaf scrap, and sends them on with a lift of the chin that means, next time will be easier, you have learned something. A vendor of chili and squash blossoms stops to exchange 3 20s for a string of tamales later. The steward makes the trade on his leaf scrap with a small drawing, a curl for chili, a flower dot for blossoms, 3 short lines for the measure. He covers the note with the smooth stone that now wears a ring of marigold, and the marigold lends the little contracted brightness it would not have earned alone. The square thickens. Potters tap their jars with fingernails to prove a ring that means no crack hides under glaze. A basket maker runs a wet hand along a rim to show reed ends sit down properly. A singer tests 2 notes into the market's air and pockets the 3rd for later. Over it all, a drum keeps a low, friendly thump time's own stall. The steward shifts to the 400 board when a trader with a mantilla of fine weave arrives. They count in larger thought. For piles of hundreds become one neat cascade into a mantle bundle. Payment returns in mantles rather than beans, 2 of one grade, 1 of another. The steward's reed pen notes cloth with a simple sign and draws a tiny zigzag to mean border good. He ties a pair of knots on the cord, different from bean knots, so his fingers will recall in the afternoon which debt belongs to which. A gentle side note: cords do what paper cannot when hands are busy. A knot holds the past without needing eyes. Untying is a form of reading. A dispute ambles toward his met. A buyer insists her 100 is missing 10. The seller insists the pile was level. The steward lays the 20 board between them and pours from the buyer's held basket 1, 22, 3, 4, 5. beans fall with their restrained rain sound. He forms a 620 from what remains and counts 12, 16, 19, 20. He tips the last few into the pile and says nothing. Both watch the board explain. The seller adds to beans more than needed, the way a river sometimes gives back a fish when a child has been patient. The buyer bows to the board, and the weight of the morning lightens a thumb. The sun leans. He pours water on his wrists from the gourd and wipes his hands on a strip of cloth kept for dryness. A boy appears with a clay cup of atoll warm and thick, sweetness small and kind. The steward buys it with 220s from his private pouch, not from the market's cords, and drinks between measures. The cup leaves a pale ring on the plank. He turns the plank end forend to hide the damp from dust and to keep his own eye cheerful. From across the square, a caller sings the hour in a voice that has no scold in it. The steward shifts chords to the second peg. Morning's measures parted from those to come. The reed pen writes a new heading on the palm scrap, mid-sun and the line under it, breeze. A gentle side note. Afternoon trades remember morning patiently. Pegs piles and little headings help minds that would rather count beans than hours. A traveling seller of copper bells kneels to admire the marigold ring. He buys a handful with beans and leaves a small bell at the edge of the steward's mat. Its tongue rests quiet now, but when tied to a child's wrist it will announce joy to those who need to hear it. The steward places the bell beside the smooth stone as if giving the wreath an ear. A woman with painted gourds brings a query. May the steward witness an exchange where cacao beans pay for a small cloak, but another item, a spool of maguey cord, will settle the difference. He agrees with a nod and carries his boards to the neighbor mat. He pours on the 20, scrapes level, and counts aloud to the rhythm the drum gives. The cloak seller tests the cord with a tug that knows how fiber ought to behave. The steward ties a loop and marks a reed line, cloak symbol, cord symbol, beans 320s. Buyer and seller touch fingers to the board's smoothness, a gesture that says enough. He returns to his place having lent shape and taken nothing. He empties a small basket for an older man whose hands shake. Beans spill into a lazy oval. The steward cups them into a pile and gives back 2 handfuls to set pride upright. He pretends to consult the 20 board and counts back 1 extra 5 he never measured, a round number only in kindness. The older man smiles at the marigold and leaves with his beans lighter by argument but not by food. A gentle side note. Markets sell dignity by the small unit, often without price. Wind lifts the shade cloth like a thought that changes. Dust rises, and then thinks better of it. The steward turns his gourd flask in its reed ring so the cooler side meets his palm next time. He sweeps his boards with a feather fan, sends 3 beans home to their pile when they try to become birds, and resumes. He handles an outland basket beans from farther west, larger, darker, carrying a fragrance that hints at smoke and fruit. He pours on the 20 and hears the difference at once, a deeper rattle, the way rain sounds under thick leaves. He levels and nods to the vendor. The price will climb a notch. People will taste the distance. He makes a reed mark 2 dots above the line for from far. He will mention them to the cloak sellers who like to talk flavor while they fold. A pair of boys juggle duties and mischief near his mat. One rolls a bean along the board's groove as if it were a boat between islands. The steward lets it happen once, and then turns the board so grooves face him. The game ends because the geography has changed. The boys grin at the ingenuity and are not shooed. They move to watch a potter's wheel instead, where circles are encouraged to be circles. The steward counts out a large shale 400, then another tying two loops in a way that stacks, meaning the first not higher, the second lower. His fingers keep the conversation. He scrapes a precise path through the beans with the edge of his hand, making a narrow road for small creatures that exist only in the mind. A child sees the road and moves a beetle along it with due ceremony. The beetle, oblivious, walks its own map and leaves. Heat thickens. The square smell changes: more flour, more clay, a little chalk from grinding stones, a deepening of Cacao's dry perfume. The steward reaches for a cloth and shades his forearm. He turns his board so the painted faces will not glare. He draws his reed pen through a dish of clean water, wipes it on the rag, and checks the pigment pot still pliant, still useful. He closes it with a twist that makes a tiny sigh, as if the jar liked being remembered. A gentle side note: lids and knots are the quiet bosses of markets. Close them well, and afternoons forget to become trouble. Near the temple wall, the sun touches the line he calls middle. He shifts his mat a palm to the left, bringing the marigold ring fully into shade. He adds one bean to the little bell and smiles at the sound, which is almost not a sound at all. He pours again onto the 20 and then onto the 100, breathing between as if the scoop were doing the same. The square carries him. He gives the square a place to make numbers into promises. Midday has become afternoon, and the counting goes on, steady as a drum heard through cloth. Afternoon leans its warm hand on the market. Shade cloth sways with the slow breath of day. The steward tips his gourd and lets a thread of water cool his tongue. He moves the 100 board a finger width, so the mark sits square to the light. Beans like to be counted by faces that do not squint. A courier from the causeway arrives with dust stitched into his sandals. He sets down a small sack with a sound like a careful promise. Inside lies mixed pay, beans, a strip of cotton, and a little copper bell, the fragments of 3 errands resolved elsewhere. The steward lays the 20 board and pours in small hills, letting the courier watch each pile form and level. He slides the cotton aside for later reckoning and ties a loop in the errand's cord. The bell he sets near the other to quiet seeds ready to ring when needed. He marks the palm leaf scrap with a short reed line runner square, and the courier departs lighter by one worry. A gentle side note: errands travel on sandals but finish on boards. Markets accept these migrations with the same willingness they grant to birds. The steward's neighbor, an old seller of salt, brings a question shaped like a smile. "Will you weigh a friendship?" he asks. A woman has offered a mantle for 300 of beans if the salt man will add a little block of salt to her basket as a courtesy. The steward nods, carries his boards to the shade where the trade waits, and pours the 3 counts while the salt man lifts a block that will last a month of cooking. He ties the loop and makes no mark at all. Courtesy does not need ink, it needs witnesses. He returns to his mat and rests a moment, the small ache in his knees a friendly messenger from the floor. A vendor of chilies arrives with eyes that joke in red. He has heard of the outland cacao and wants to taste the distance. The steward pours a 20 into the vendor's hand, payment reversed, and watches his face, red pepper against bitter. The vendor nods, delighted by the thought of a sauce that tells two stories at once. He pays for a small measure with 3/20 and a promise to send buyers with loud opinions. The reed pen notes a dot above the line spice hears. Markets like to keep track of which mouths carry news best. Drums change their tune, signaling the hour when far sellers begin to pack. The steward adjusts his cords, morning loops to the left peg, afternoon loops to the right, an accounting that prevents confusion when shadows lengthen. He rubs the 100 board with his palm and feels the day's smoothness growing like a river stone underwater. Two women dispute quietly about beans that look alike but do not pour alike. One insists her beans are from a grove with more shade. The other claims sun makes strength. The steward spreads both piles thin across the plank, listens as he sifts. Shade beans whisper lower, sunbeams chatter higher. He separates a finger's length of each and drops them into a little cup, tapping the bottoms top for shade, teak for sun. The women hear the difference and end the quarrel with a trade of 3 handfuls to blend the stories. The steward returns to his mat, pleased at how sound can be a teacher without becoming a scold. A gentle side note: quality often arrives at the ear before it reaches the tongue. Markets train hearing as much as hands. Heat climbs the stone walls, shade cloth glows a little like a quiet lantern. The steward loosens the cord around his waist and shifts his seat. A potter brings a shallow bowl with a chipped lip and asks if beans can pay for a better one. The steward nods, counts out 3/20 onto the 100 board, and slides the beans to the potter's mat. The potter chooses a bowl whose rim is so even it looks like wind forgot to touch it. He bows with the chin, good math, and leaves behind the chip piece for someone who will see use where others see flaw. The market takes that kind of logic and grows on it. A boy appears with a small bundle of quail eggs wrapped in damp leaves to keep them cool. He wants to trade for beans enough to buy a reed flute at the far corner. The steward counts a modest measure and makes a reed mark a circle with dots to remind himself to tell the flute seller there is a musician coming who pays in eggs and gratitude. He tucks the bundle behind his mat, sheeted. Later, the eggs will become someone's easy evening. The marigold ring around the stone sheds 3 petals. The steward presses them into the mat's weave with the flat of his thumb, as if tucking a child. He straightens the little copper bells so they do not argue with each other's silence. He opens the pigment jar, tests the reed pen on the scrap still obedient, and writes a small heading, "After heat." A gentle side note: headings do to ours what knots do to cords. They keep time from tangling. A man in a cloak with embroidered edge arrives, confident in his eye, less confident in his numbers. He places a large order to 400s and 300s payment to be split among beans, and a feather fan the steward's sister wanted months ago and never claimed. The steward counts without display, ties loops with thoughtless accuracy, and sends a boy to the feather seller with the palm scrap that holds the fan sign. The boy returns with the exact fan, bright and soft, the sort of breeze a room can trust. The cloakman smiles. The steward adds a small 20 to the favor's cord, not dead exactly, but attention waiting to be returned. Wine pushes a scent of roasting maize through the square. A tamal vendor pauses, and the steward buys another, paying in neat beans from his private pouch. He is standing, hand over the board to keep crumbs from becoming a confusion. He licks his thumb once salt and wipes it on the cloth kept for that purpose. The scoop continues to work, the line continues to move, the day continues to have shape. A runner from the temple quarter comes with a tablet painted with a request. Prepare 400 invisible piles for a priest who will arrive at shadow length to purchase dyes. The steward stacks the 100 board on the 400 and builds for hills so even a distant glance can see honesty. He places a small feather atop each pile, no sacred mark, only a signal the eye likes. He ties 4 loops and slides them to the far peg reserved for coming promises. The reed pen writes a neat row of 4 short lines on the scrap. The market now holds a future in plain sight. A gentle side note, visible preparation calms large buyers. It turns waiting into watching, which is easier on the heart. The saltman returns with a story about a counterfeit bead string in a nearby stall, shell discs painted clever to lighten the hand. The steward thanks him and drags his palm across his own beans, comforted by Waite's honesty. He resolves to listen more closely for hollow sounds and to press a little harder when he levels piles. Not suspicion, just care widened by news. Children weave between mats carrying tiny errands, a gourd here, a spool there, a leaf-wrapped sweet that longs to be eaten before it arrives. The steward gives 3 beans to a girl who delivers a message to the feather seller. The girl drops one, recovers it with a gasp and a grin, and seals them in her fist as if they might fly. He marks 1 dot on the scrap, his way of remembering that small couriers deserve large respect. The sun begins its slope toward the temple rim. Shade lengthens, voices lower. The steward moves his mat again, drawing the marigold ring fully into the cool. He gathers the morning palm scrap, the little history of trades and promises, and copies its marks onto a clean leaf with unhurried care. He rubs the old scrap between his palms until the fibers separate and fall like brown snow. He scatters them under the mat. Some records should become dust at the hour. They are no longer needed. He counts a last 400 for a cloak seller who arrives exact at each day's warmest minute, declares this pile as good as yesterday's, and pays with a strip of cloth printed with small rabbits that look as if they enjoy running. The steward ties the loop and smiles at the print. Numbers have their jokes, too. A gentle side note, humor wears trade clothes lightly. A rabbit in cotton is an afternoon spared from sternness. He looks to the temple wall and reads the shade's line. Not yet the hour of the priest. He resets the 20 board, smooths the edge with his hand, and pours again. Beans speak their soft grammar, rattle, settle, hush. The market answers with its 1,000 small verbs: tie, wave, fold, taste, agree. Afternoon has become the kind of lake that is not yet evening, and the counting continues, careful and kind. Heat loosens its grip as afternoon tilts toward kinder light. The steward eases his shoulders and rubs the heel of his palm along the 100 board, a habit that feels like greeting a coworker at the last watch. Shade cloths billow with a breath from the lake. The marigold ring around the smooth stone settles into a deeper gold, less bright, more certain. The priest arrives at the hour predicted by the temple wall's shadow, flanked by 2 helpers carrying empty nets. His mantle is simple. His feet read the ground without complaint. The steward steps from his mat as if rising from a desk, and gestures toward the 4 prepared hundreds, for even hills capped by feathers. The priest acknowledges with a nod, no fuss, and lifts 1 feather to see the pile accept the loss without slumping. The steward tips each heel into the net with a scoop that has never hurried. He ties 4 loops on the coming promises cord into the fulfilled peg and smooths the line of knots with a thumb. The reed pen draws 4 short strokes on a fresh palm scrap, then a tiny dot to mean paid in quiet. The priest's helpers lift the nets as if carrying sleeping children and vanish back into the square, where dice sellers will greet them with bowls the color of dusk. A gentle side note: in markets, ceremony likes to wear ordinary clothes. The dignity lives in the steadiness, not in the noise. A new breeze carries the smell of roasting squash seeds and a thin ribbon of incense from a stall where a woman burns resin to keep flies uninterested. The steward turns his gourd in its reed ring and drinks, then pours a cool sheen across his wrists. He rotates the 20 boards so its face meets the softer glow of light, and brushes 3 stray beans hone with the side of his hand. A cloak seller from the Lake District arrives with damp still clinging to the hem of his mantle. He prefers to pay fees in a pattern 200s, 120, then a smile that is almost a coin. The steward meets the pattern with its echo, sets beads, ties loops, and returns the smile in the thin coin of attention. He writes 1 reed line on the scrap and adds a small curve to signify lake. Later, when the cloth smells less of water and more of evening, the note will become a memory and then politely become nothing. The saltman returns to sit for a moment at the edge of the mat. He does not speak. The steward does not either. They watch a path open between stalls for a woman carrying stacked bowls with 1 hand and a free elbow. She passes like a character drawn in a single stroke. The saltman places a small block of salt beside the marigold ring and leaves without ceremony, a gift measured in usefulness rather than surprise. The steward moves 1 knot along the favors cord to the resting end, the place where thanks are considered paid. A gentle side note: friendships keep their ledgers with knots, not numbers. The accounts show in where you sit and what you don't need to say. Toward the square's center, a singer chooses a slow tune. The drum follows at a thoughtful distance. The steward counts a large order for a traveling trader who sells dyes and stories in equal measures. From far, the trader says of his beans. The steward listens to their lower rattle and agrees. He ties a knot with a tiny tail, his private sign for distance respected, and the trader answers with a ribbon of blue he slips under the steward's mat, half hidden, as if shade could be dyed. Children surface again, as they do when heat steps back. 1 carries the quail eggs meant for the flute seller, careful as if balancing moons. The steward ties a loop in the errand's cord and draws the little circle and dots mark on his scrap as a second reminder. He adds a dot near the circle when the boy returns with the flute a thin reed with 2 notes already inside it, waiting for breath to let them out. The boy's gratitude sounds like air rehearsing music. A dispute comes small and cautious. A woman has paid with a string that seems heavy for 400s. The steward empties the string onto the 100 board and makes 4 neat piles, then sees 15 beans resting between planks where a splinter once made a home. He lifts the board, rescues the 15 with a fingertip sweep, and tips them into the 4th pile. Boards like to keep a little for themselves, he says, returning to beans anyway as interest the board cannot pay. Laughter rescues pride before it trips. The woman ties her string again with a knot that sits flatter, and the morning's tension nowhere returns. A gentle side note: tools have habits. Good keepers learn them, forgive them, and design around them. The steward checks his pigment pot. A skin has formed polite, not stubborn. He stirs with the reed and tests on the scrap, a black that sits like a comfortable guest. He draws a heading, before dusk, then adds to short notes wind easy boats honest phrases that will turn into coin and timing in other people's rooms. He lifts the marigold loop, shakes out the match crumbs, and settles the flowers again around the stone. The copper bells nudge each other once, and then keep their treaty of quiet. From the temple side, a woman arrives with a small woven purse and a list made by someone else. She needs 500s for a festival kitchen, for drink, for sauce, for a suite that welcomes guests. The steward builds the piles one after another, each humped like a small hill in a school of hills. The woman counts with eyes, not hands, and matches his steady. He ties 5 loops, lays the cords across her palm so they weigh evenly, and writes 5 with 5 short marks on a leaf scrap. He hands her the scrap and the memory together. She tucks both under the strap that holds her basket. In the purse, a carved bead clicks against another. The sound is approval. The sun slides below the temple's notched edge. Light becomes a more specific thing, selecting cheekbones and board edges and the rim of the gourd. The steward shifts his mat and wipes the 100 plank a final time with the cloth that has become its companion. He counts a last trade with outland beans and makes the tiny far dots with the reed. He lifts one bean to his ear and rolls it between finger and thumb. Rattle says true, weight says honest. A small caravan of reed mats arrives, folded and tied, the property of shade merchants, who will close the square by lengthening the sky with woven night. They stack against the temple wall with a sigh, like good cloth being polite. The steward nods to them the way one nods to neighbors who share a fence and a moon. He opens his private pouch and buys a final tamal, pays the vendor with a neat 20, and eats it standing, mind unhooking from sums while hands remain friendly to the scoop. He turns the 20 board over to dry its underside before evening cool persuades damp to linger. He checks his cords, morning's loops left, afternoon's right, errands and favors sorted with quiet fairness. The coming promises pegged now empty and pleased. A gentle side note, a clean peg is a kind thought toward night. It says tomorrow will not inherit confusion. A last query arrives to teenagers with a cloak priced in beans they do not yet have. They propose 300s now and to 20s by dawn. The steward listens to the impatience braided into youth's voice and then rearranges the terms with a gentle hand. 200s now, 100 in the first hour. The rest in 20s by sunset tomorrow, a cord not tied here to remember. Faces relax, ambition puts on manners. He ties the memory knot on the coming promises peg and draws a short crisscross on the scrap. The cloak seller approves the shape. The teenagers fold the cloak as if learning to fold is also a lesson in counting. When no one waits at his mat, the steward kneels and copies his leaf scrap into a cleaner line, the way a clerk closes a day's page. He keeps only the marks that must live past sundown. Lake man pattern, counterfeit shells rumor, festival kitchen 5, youth scored not far beams. He rubs away the rest with his thumb and lets the brown dust become part of the mat's patience. A breeze arrives with the taste of cooler water. The shade cloths billow and then fall, agreeing with the air. The steward stacks his boards 20 on 100 on 400 and ties them with a soft band. He sets the scoop upon them like a lid that has earned its quiet. He gathers cords, counting loops by touch, 1, 3, 7, and so on, each not a bead on the string of the day. The square's noise thins, not to silence, but to the kind of murmur that lets crickets later feel invited. Vendors straighten their mats, lean their baskets, call out the last of flowers and fruit. The steward places the copper bells in his basket, nestles the marigold ring on top, as if crowning a small king, and covers the pigment jar with the scrap that smells of glue and soot and time. He looks once more across the square, the painted boards elsewhere laid on their sides, the reed pens wiped and tucked, the cords hanging loose without stories on them. He lifts his basket and rises. A bean rolls from under the edge of his mat, pauses as if deciding whether to be lost, and surrenders to his fingertip. He places it on the 20 board before binding, not because one bean changes a count, but because one kindness changes the posture of sleep. Evening's color gathers at the corners. Trade has become talk, talk will become supper. The steward ties his mat with the same knot he uses for favors settled, easy to open tomorrow with one satisfied pull. Evening drifts down the square like a shawl lowered over careful shoulders. Shade cloth loosens its grip and becomes sky's echo. The steward aunties the soft bander on his boards and lays the 20 plank out once more, not for a sale, but for the comfort of finishing in a familiar stance. The scoop sits ready because hands prefer to end the way they began. A woman arrives with late beans wrapped in cloth, apology folded into the corners. She has walked far and does not want to carry them home again. The steward sets the 100 board and pours steady, the sound now a hush against the new cool. He levels, ties a loop, and slides 2 extra beans onto her cloth without naming the reason. Dusk is kinder when it notices you. She bows with her jaw rather than her head, that gesture that says she will sleep easier. He wipes the plank with the heel of his palm, then turns it to let its face breathe. He checks the pigment jar and writes the last heading on the palm scrap. Dusk? Under he marks 5 brief lines, priest fulfilled. Kitchen 5, youth's not, lakeman pattern kept. Far beans fair. He draws a tiny circle up the scrap's corner, the sign he uses for no quarrels, and lets the reed fall quiet on the rag. A gentle side note, the day's last marps often carry the most peace. They tell the mind it may set down its baskets. The square thins without emptying. Sellers stack bowls rim to rim, lay woven mats in long rolls, and shake crumbs into their palms as if feeding small, imaginary birds. Flower vendors gather the strongest blossoms back into garlands, their fingers green and sure. Potters put broken pieces into one basket, whole ones into another. The drum changes to a soft, walking beat, conversation follows. The steward copies his palm scrap to a cleaner leaf while light still knows how to hold it. His letters slow, weight shifting to the brush of the reed. He pauses to blow on the lines, then dusts them with a whisper of powdered lime from a neighbor's basket. This is not custom, but an old habit learned from a scribe who believed dust carried luck. Fast politely. The marks dry to a fine, even black. The qulliq boy returns, flute tucked into his belt. He plays to thin notes, not a tune, more greeting to the hour. The steward hands in 5 beans as a musician's coin. The boy juggles them once and then wisely pockets them, lesson remembered from an earlier spill. He disappears toward a lane where sound travels farther than feet. The salt man, finished with his own small counts, settles beside the steward with the creaks of a day well used. They watch a cart of woven reed mats lean into motion. The steward passes him the palm scrap. The salt man reads the marks with the ease of someone who trusts the writer. He taps Festival Kitchen 5 and smiles at the forecast of sweet drinks. He returns the leaf and stands satisfied with knowledge that costs no beans. A gentle side note: reading another's tally is a friendship made of minutes. It says, "Your day matters in my room." The priest's helpers reappear for a final check. No, not for more beans, only to confirm that tomorrow's hour will be the same. The steward touches the empty coming promises peg with his knuckle and nods, a code as plain as a bell. They go, nets already telling their own stories in a rhythm of rope against hip. A last small business finds him a woman with a narrow string of coins and a wish to turn them into beans enough for a visitor's drink. She lays the string down, ashamed of its thin sound. The steward weighs it not with scale but with tone, then unties the knot and places the coins into her palm one by one so the evening will not think she gave everything away. He pours to 20s and a small 5 from a private pouch, ties a loop on his favor's cord, and writes a dot beside it to mean gladly. She folds the beans in cloth, as if folding a blanket over a friend. He gathers his cords now, sliding morning loops to one coil, afternoon to another errands and favors apart so they will not tangle in the night. He ties each coil with its own knot, the easy for morning, the flat for afternoon, the remember for promises. He runs a thumb over the knots, reading them the way others reading. They give their answers without fuss. The marigold ring looks tired in the nicest way. He lifts it, shakes out the mat's polite debris, and places the flowers on the smooth stone one last time. 3 petals hold on. 1 lets go and lands on the 20th board with a soft tap. He leaves it there as if an elder's hand had blessed a slate. A gentle side note: some rooms prefer blessings that look like petals and rest like silence. He tips the pigment jar's lid, slides the reed pen into its cloth, and ties the cloth with a knot that says the reed will not wander in the basket. He bundles the boards 20, 100, 400 and wraps them in the woven mat, the scoop resting like a folded wing across the top. The copper bells nestle together and still refuse to ring good bells, mindful of neighbors. Around him, stall by stall, the square rehearses the same softness. Cloth lifted so it will not learn dust, gourds turned lip down so morning will not taste old air. Baskets leaned in pairs for comfort. A girl picks up a fallen blossom with the seriousness of a priest and returns it to a garland. A potter sets the chipped bowl near the path with a twig in it, the sign that says free to a person who reads such signs. The steward ties his mat with the satisfied knot and stands, easing his knees in the kind way knees prefer. He looks at the temple wall's shadow, now a ribbon at the base, and at the first evening star making itself known in the high, patient sky. He turns once in a slow circle to inventory what should be remembered and what should be left to the dark. Remember, far beans ask for them tomorrow, if the wind allows. Remember, youths not offer kindness if they return with the last 20s thin. Leave a day's dust under the mat, the sound of disputes that learn to be agreements, the smell of flowers now living somewhere else. He lifts the basket. A single bean rests where his mat was. He leaves it on purpose. Not for birds. Birds have their own economy, but for luck of place, the idea that markets like to find themselves again by a small familiar. At the square's edge he passes the dye stalls, where bowls of blue-red, and yellow drink the day's last light. He thinks of the priest's nets heavy with beans and of cooks measuring by hand in kitchens that will glow late. He nods to the flute boy in the lane, who has discovered a third note. He follows the salt man down the causeway where water holds dusk like a mirror that knows when to soften. A gentle side note, departure can be counted too. 1 basket, 1 mat, 3 coils of knots, a reed pen sleeping, a wreath of tired gold. Enough? By the time he reaches the causeway's shoulder, evening has read itself into night. Behind him, Tlatelolco's square dins to a thoughtful ash. What remains is the memory of beans traveling from sack to board to basket, cords tying promises and releasing them, small kindnesses parked in ledgers as dots and tails. A bell that did not need to ring to be heard. He will return tomorrow with boards wiped, cords reset, scoop ready, pigment patient. He will sit in the moving shade and count until the sun says enough. Tonight, he will eat, rinse dust from his hands with water poured twice, and sleep with wrists that feel pleasantly used. Somewhere, in a room not far, a cook will grind cacao into drink for visitors. They will raise bowls to lips in a ritual that is simply supper made generous. The steward's work will be in those bowls, quiet as sweetness hiding under bitter. The square exhales. Shadows fold themselves neatly. The boards, wrapped and warm from the day's touch, ride under his arm like tame chapters. Numbers go to bed. The market sleeps on its broad back. And as the shade cloths become stars and the counting becomes rest, we drift north and west to a place where the ground keeps water like a quiet memory, where men in wooden clogs slice the summer into neat bricks that will warm winter rows of peat rising from a Dutch bog in the hour before dew lifts. Morning opens like a lid eased off a jar. The bog keeps its breath cool and even. Water holds the sky in small, patient mirrors between islands of moss. In the Low Countries, summer knows how to be damp without arguing. A cutter steps from the dike onto the boardwalk of planks laid last week, each board with 2 nails that shine the way modest things shine. Wooden clogs find their rhythm. The clogs sound hollow and kind, a conversation between wood and sod. He wears linen that remembers soap, and sun from yesterday evening's wash, dried under eaves where swallows approve all laundry. Over the linen, a coarse wool waistcoat keeps the chest steady against breeze. A narrow leather belt carries a small knife, a cord of twine, and a tin cup that dents with cheerful honesty. In his hand, the turf spade, an iron mouth long and thin, its sides braced, its handle smooth by years of damp hands. The spade has a face like a long spoon, and a step ledge for his boot. It is a tool that understands the sentence, lift, slice, lever, lay. A gentle side note, the bog is not a field, it is a book. You read its wet pages with a spade and turn them carefully to dry. He sets the plank bridge across the first drainage ditch, positions it by ISO edges overhand the same amount, and tests with his weight half. That hole. The board answers by not moving. He steps across and reaches the marked rectangle he measured yesterday with a willow rod and a string. The plot is small enough to be a day's friend and large enough to become a winter's comfort. He presses the spade into living moss to cut a sod skin and folds it back like a quilt, exposing peat dark as bread that has been honest with fire. The first slice is always deliberate. He plants his clog on the step ledge and presses down. The spade's blade travels into the peat with a quiet sound, not a squelch, His weight persuades rather than forces. He levers the cut and lifts a brick long, damp, almost black, heavy in the way honest work is heavy. He lays it on the board beyond, then carves a second, a third, a row. Each brick lies with its long side to the breeze, a habit learned from men who learned from men who learned from marsh and moon. Ear carries three smells at once: sour sweet peat, wild mint bruised by clogs near the ditch, and the faint iron of water that has not yet decided to move. Dragonflies write silver lines in the warm baits. A reed warbler rehearses a rattle from the far edge. He works in even phrases: 10 bricks, breathe, 10 more, adjust the plank, 10 more, look up. Tlatelolco learns joy. The spade's rhythm slides into the arm and becomes a metronome the mind can nap against. He spreads the first row on a bed of thin sticks so air can walk under as well as over. He turns his body toward the small cart he left on the dike. The cart waits with its rope handle coiled like a sleeping snake. Later, when the bog has surrendered weight, he will ferry lightened bricks to the drying field. For now the bog keeps them a while longer, teaching them to be smoke. A gentle side note: peat is summer in storage. The work is to fold it, dry it, and stack it until winter remembers it kindly. From his bag he pulls bread that smells of rye and last week's caraway to slices wrapped in cloth, with a thumb of cheese that behaves well in heat. He leaves them in shade under an upturned basket, safe from insects who respect a man who respects baskets. He tucks the tin cup under the spring where water creeps from under the sedge, and the cup begins to mutter a cold thought into its dented shape. He returns to cutting. The spade finds a pace. He works the rectangle back on itself in lanes, never too wide, never too deep, because the bog has feelings about balance. He leaves a low wall at the far edge, a sod bank to keep the water where it belongs. The sun rubs color into the moss. His shirt sticks, then dries, then sticks again, a tide on a body. He wipes his palm on his waistcoat before each longer lift, not because he needs to, but because rituals keep hands cheerful. He breaks to turn the first row. The bricks no longer gleam, they have learned a mat patience. He flips each with a small wooden paddle, the paddle shaped like the tongue of a large shoe. He does not throw them, he invites them to present another face to air. After turning, he props a few against one another at a light angle so breeze can learn the triangles. Stacked too soon, they sulk. Left too long, they curl. He knows the hour by how they behave. A neighbor coughs hello to plots away. The neighbor's hat is older than his own, but the neighbor's back is straighter. They trade remarks about last night's dew, and about Cacao at the farm that insists on drinking from the ditch with both a plan and no sense. Remarks in a bog are mostly weather and livestock, with the occasional philosophy about boards. He offers a spare plank. The neighbor declines with a smile that says his plan is different, not better. A breeze turns and brings the sea a rumor. He lifts his head, reads clouds through dragonfly flight, still low, still friendly. He sinks the spade again. The peat breaks clean. In the ditch, a small frog studies him with the serious face all frogs have. He greets it with a nod that is not ridiculous if you are polite with water. A gentle side note: creatures are your co-workers in places like this. Frog, dragonfly, reed warbler, they check your pace more honestly than clocks. Mid-morning. He carries the first lighter bricks to the drying field. The field is a shallow rise of ground, covered with older, well-behaved turf, a page where bricks learn how to be called fuel. He builds low racks, 3 bricks on the bottom, 2 across, 1 on top, little ladders that teach when to climb. In Dutch the stacks have names, compact syllables that feel square in the mouth. He says one aloud because mouths like to help hands. The racks extend along the rise, neat as a multiplication table. He returns for water. The tin cup under the spring holds something so cold it looks like a thought. He lifts it and drinks without showing off. The cold travels down and spreads a calm. He pours the last mouthful over his wrists, and the skin becomes a new person for a minute. He tucks the cup back into its place on the belt with a click that the day agrees with. A boat passes along the canal beyond the dike, low and practical, with a stack of finished turf bricks under a sail that believes in small wings. The boatman nods with his chin, the accepted greeting among people who work with weight. The cutter nods back and notes the color of those bricks, milk chocolate brown, sound, not too dark, not too light. He imagines his own stacks finishing in that color, and feels the small coin of pride arrive without ceremony. He keeps cutting. The spade's iron lip glows where turf rubs it clean. He oils the wood handle at noon with a thumb of linseed saved in a corked vial, rubbing until the grain wakes and sighs. He tightens the iron collar that binds blade to shaft, a quarter turn only. Tools, like horses, dislike surprise. A gentle side note, maintenance counts as labor even when no one pays for it. In winter, oil wood writes its thanks in every warm hour. Clouds pass like slow sails. He eats his bread and cheese in 4 unambitious bites and sits with his clogs hanging over the ditch so blood remembers ankles. Nent bruises under one heel and sends a clean word into the air. A heron steps carefully through a far pool, neck an instrument measuring depth. He watches, not idly, but the way you rest the part of you that counts. Then back to it. Rows lengthen. Bricks turn. A neat pile begins near the cart. He rearranges his boardwalk, moving planks forward the way a millipede moves legs one, then another, always a place to stand. He never trusts a long step where a short one fits. He speaks to the bog once softly to thank it for not swallowing anything today that would be hard to write a letter about. By late afternoon's first thought, the cut rectangle has the look of a tidy wound, edges clean, center made into future. He smooths the exposed face with the spade, not for beauty, but because clean edges drain kinder. He lays the moss back at the near side, tucking it like a blanket so the living skin will knit. The bog notices such courtesies. Next year's moss is partly a thank you note. He stands, hands on hips, and looks along the drying field where ladders of peat hold the wind as if they borrowed it. He counts without numbers just the weight of a winter evening he can now end by touching a tinder, the kettles that will agree to boil, the room that will smell like earth remembering sun. The cart creaks once, as if clearing its throat. He will load only the lightest bricks today, no greed. The bog gives more to those who take less at once. He nods to the plan, wipes the spade's blade with a scrap of sackcloth, and leans it where clogs will not trip over it later. The day is not finished. It has simply become ready for its second rhythm, carrying, stacking, setting the rows into a choir that sings when wind rehearses it. He lifts the first armful and walks toward the rise, steps steady, breathing in the measured way work teaches. He carries bricks in pairs across his forearms, the way one carries sleeping cats, balanced, close, unhurried. At the drying rise he kneels and builds more ladders, 3 on the ground, 2 across, 1 on top. He turns the top one slightly crosswise so wind learns to eddy. The stacks look like little bridges that go nowhere and fix everything. He taps each with a knuckle to hear readiness. A dull thud is honest for now, a hollow knock will belong to later. Back at the cut, he lays a short board across the ditch and shifts the cart forward a handspan at a time. The cart is narrow with low sides and a floor that has learned to forgive damp without warping. Its iron hoops are mottled from past summers. He keeps the load light. A heavy cart tempts the ditch to speak in the wrong voice. His clogs find the plank with the accuracy of shoes that trust boards more than ground. A gentle side note: speed in a bog is a rumor you do not repeat. Wait listens to gossip. He turns the morning's rose. The first face shows a skin, less shine, more resolve. He flips each brick with the wooden paddle, edge to palm, pond to air, air to rest. The paddle's surface is polished by thousands of small pushes. He never throws. Bricks dislike being treated as stones. They prefer to be treated as bread. He props some into smaller frames to leaning, one bridging an airy geometry taught by grandfathers standing on these same slow sponges. A neighbor calls from 3 plots away, a woman with a kerchief and a laugh that carries without forcing. She has found a reed mat washed in by last season's flood and offers it up if he needs a better path across a soft patch. He waves thanks and promises a handful of his drier bricks next week when her lane begins to ask for them. Trades like these are kept in the mouth and in the habit, not in ink. He checks the sky by reading its reflection in the ditch. Clouds cross the water as slowly as convictions change. Midges dance where a breath of air corrals them into a circle. A swallow flicks through and removes a sentence's worth of midges, then writes a new line with its tail. He smiles without showing teeth. The bog is busy and polite. He pauses to drink. The tin cup clicks against his teeth with a familiar metal hello. Cold water answers summer's suggestion. He rinses the cup in the flow and clips it back to the belt, a small bell that reminds the day he is listening. He breaks the last bite of bread and keeps the heel for the walk home. Things taste better when a little hunger is saved for later. The spade returns to work. He cuts a second rectangle smaller, respectful, and lays its bricks at a new angle so wind can learn variety and not fall asleep. He hums a tune that likely began in a weaving room and finds that the spade prefers the rhythm to be in 4s. He presses with his clogs in step, never the toe slide in steps ask. The iron mouth parts the peat. The peat agrees to part because he asks properly. A gentle side note: tools are grammar. Step here, push there. Lift now syntax that turns marsh into hearth. By early afternoon the first ladders begin to talk differently when tapped. He separates the more eager bricks and makes taller racks, 2 on the bottom, then 2 crosswise, then 1, then another. Small towers called Hagen by some, Meaton by others, names that feel square in the throat. He leaves alleys between them, where wind can walk and children could, if they were here, play shopkeeper. The bog insects approve. They use the alleys as tunnels of shade. He wipes his hands on the sackcloth and oils the spade handle again, only a thumbprint this time. The grain drinks and smiles. He tightens the strap across his head against a frisk of wind. A low cloud comes and goes, and the light changes from pewter to pewter with honey. He turns 3 stacks that had begun to forget their bottoms. He never scolds a stack. He reminds it that both sides are equally deserving of sky. At the far edge a pair of boys with a hired cart trundle past, arms all elbows, cart empty, hopeful. They plan to carry for an uncle whose field lies in the firmest ground. They stop to watch his ladders, and nod in the way boys nod when copying is an honest craft. He points to the A-frames and the small towers, shows the gap he leaves so rain has a place to be that is not inside. They listen with their feet, eyes on the cart's wheel where the axle sings a thin complaint. He lends them a pinch of tallow and a rag. The wheel hum changes from worry to work. A dragonfly lands on the spade shaft, facing him as if considering employment. He holds still and offers the posture of a patient fence post. The insect scrubs its forelegs together, approves the arrangement, and leaves on some quick errand only dragonflies understand. He resumes, a little cheered by the interview. A gentle side note, encouragement arrives in small costumes, dragonflies, will songs, a cloud that remembers to move. He moves the boardwalk again, 1 plank forward, 1 lifted from behind, laid in front, never stranding himself, never trusting a long reach where a short step can be made. The method looks fussy to outsiders and feels like wisdom to those who keep dry socks at the top of their mind. He relishes the hollow knock of plugs on plank, that dry wooden syllable that means the day will end as clean as it began. Toward mid-afternoon, he shifts to carry. He loads the cart with a modest pile, wheels chucked against the board's little tilt. He leans into the rope, hips steady, shoulders square, and lets the cart come with him as if it had chosen to do so. At the rise he unloads and builds another row of towers, each with a tiny twist in the top, brick, pure habit, pure pleasure. He places a long stick across 2 towers to make a rail for tomorrow's hats and gloves to dry. He will forget that he thought of this and then be pleased at his own foresight when the morning is a little colder. A heron takes the canal bank for a runway and lifts, legs trailing like thoughts that will catch up soon. The water surface remembers the heron's feet for 3 rings, then chooses forgetfulness. He takes the cue and forgets counts for a while, working by sight alone, placing bricks until the row pleases his eye. Straight enough, airy enough, a page the wind will read kindly. He returns to the cut and smooths its edges where a careless foot might trip tomorrow. He pulls the moss quilt back over fresh stitch faces that do not need to meet moonlight. The moss sits. He strokes it once, a gardener's reflex, though he is not exactly a gardener. The bob appreciates the gesture by resuming its frog conversation without pause. A gentle side note, tending what you have just taken is a language both land and body accept. Another neighbor pauses with a barrow and remarks about the blackbird that has learned to sit on barrow handles, as if receiving a ride. They trade a joke about charging fare. He offers the neighbor a sip from the spring-cooled cup. The neighbor declines with the very words that mean yes in this dialect, not for me, unless you insist. He insists the exactly proper amount, and they drink, and the afternoon notes this as paid. Cloud shadows march across the drying field like thoughts you can count. He takes the cheese heel from his pocket and eats it without sitting, chewing becoming another rhythm in the long phrase of work. The taste is sharp and generous. He flicks a crumb to the ditch bank. A small bird accepts without needing to thank. He turns to a new row and begins building Hagen slightly taller, These will be the first to travel by cart once the week turns and the wind song changes. He touches a tower lightly with 2 fingers. It wiggles no more than a handshake. He nods. Stability is a kind of civility in windy countries. At the dike, a man in a cap calls down an update. The canal boat will pass again near evening, lighter now. If anyone has a load that thinks it can be ready by tomorrow, the boat will not mind earning twice. He stores the notice where such news belongs in the pocket where plans and weather share a room. He pulls the cart back to the cut and selects the most eager bricks, whiter at the edges, less stubborn. He builds a special row near the path and whispers to it, not because it helps, but because his father did. A gentle side note: acts we inherit become tools even when they change nothing but our faces. He lifts the spade for the day's last useful cut, the kind that makes tomorrow grateful but does not make tonight sore. The iron lip slides in as if invited. He pries a final neat brick and sets it on the board, admiring the clean edge that means the peat listened closely. He stops while he still wants to continue. The desire will be there in the morning, like a seat saved at a table. Now the hour belongs to tidying. He washes the paddle in the ditch and dries it with a twist of grass. He rubs the spade's blade with the sackcloth and sets it in the shade so metal will not remember sun too intensely. He wedges the cart's wheel against roll and lays the rope in a tidy serpent by the handle. He lifts a plank and shakes the water beads from its underside so tomorrow's first step will feel kindly to socks. He gathers to mint sprigs and tucks them under the cart rail. The smell will be a letter to his morning self. He looks along the rise where ladders and towers stand at attention. Wind moves through them like a school learning to sing. Somewhere a kettle will one day celebrate this choir. He breathes once, counts without numbers, and writes the sum in his posture. The bog gives a small, almost inaudible blessing, the kind that sounds like nothing and feels like balance. He answers by placing one brick back on its side. The top had grown proud. It is a conversation that will last all week. The day's bending toward its cooler edge. He pushes the cart onto the boardwalk and lets the boards talk him home. Evening begins by cooling the edges of things. The boardwalk's planks lose their shine and become the good kind of dull. The cart's iron hoops give off a faint, satisfied tick as warm meets mild. He draws the rope and lets the cart follow like a polite dog. Weight answers, but not in argument. He keeps to the path he laid this morning, plank small islands that remember each step and promise to remember again tomorrow. At the drying rise he sets down another pair of bricks. He builds taller hagen now, each tier placed with a pause that lets air claim its share. Two across, one, then another, then a last brick set slightly askew, a notch the wind understands. He presses his palm gently to the side. The tower hums a low wooden note that means safe. He moves to the next, and the next, repeating the plot until the row looks like a line of short, considered shepherds. He returns to the cut with empty arms. On the way he stops at the ditch to wash peat from the paddle's edge. The water takes the color and does not complain. Small frogs appear like commas along the bank, punctuating the path. He greets the one nearest with a tilt of his head. The frog blinks, as if a sentence had ended well. A gentle side note: dusk teaches tools to soften their voices. Wood changes from click to thud, iron from ring to murmur, water from sparkle to silk. He lifts lighter bricks and loads the cart to half. He does not tempt the day to reconsider its good temper, but clogs not the plank once, twice, then choose a quieter step that spreads weight without asking the board to remember a story it doesn't enjoy. He leans into the rope, the small muscles between shoulder blades pleased to do a task that belongs to them. At the rise he spreads the load and walks a short lane between towers, checking angles. Where a brick sulks, he rotates it a hand's breadth. Where a gap grows stingy, he draws a finger through and widens it. Wine needs lanes as much as people do. He lays a long rod, smooth as a spindle, across to tall stacks the place where tomorrow's shirt and socks will learn the lesson of early air. He pauses for water. The tin cup is cool again. The spring is patience given a mouth. He drinks and remembers to breathe all the way down. The breath returns with a small gift, the smell of mint he tucked earlier under the cart rail. It has bruised into friendliness. He smiles at his own letter to himself and considers writing another. A neighbor passes along the dike with a load of reeds for thatch, the bundle tied with a twist that never loosens by accident. They trade a few words about wine, no talk of storm, just of direction and favor. West by a little, the neighbor says, looking at a line of small ripples that no more than flags do. West by a little, he agrees, and turns to towers a step to present a different cheek to the evening. A gentle side note, alignment, is a quiet craft. In orchards, in drying fields, in shelves of books turning a thing by a finger with let's air and like practice better manners. He checks the cut's edge and folds a strip of moss over a corner that looks thirsty. The peat beneath answers with a darker line. He sets a flat stone at the lip where boots might forget themselves, teaching the step to drop from habit rather than chance. He shifts the plank a handspan and pats the ground once with the flat of the spade, not to flatten it, only to remind it they will need one another tomorrow. A boat hum floats across the canal low, content. The same boat as earlier slides by, its stack of finished turf now lower, its sail a darker gray against the sky. The boatman raises a hand, and he answers with the spade lifted level greeting between trades that both lift and stack. The boat's wake taps the bank, and the reeds bow in one long approving nod. He carries another armful, sets it down, then listens. Towers speak if you ask with attention. A good stack makes the small, hollow promise of dryness when tapped. A new one replies with the dull honesty of work to be done. He arranges accordingly. 2 towers near the cart have grown to proud. He removes the top brick from each and lays them as bridges between neighbors, making small arches that delight the eye and also the wind. Swallows gather lower for their evening practice, stitching the air with seams that hold the field together. He watches for a count of 30. They draw patterns that a loon would envy and then choose another sky. On the water a heron stands where it stood at noon, the lesson ongoing. He returns to the spade and wipes the handle with the sackcloth, not to clean, but to smooth. Wood learns from hands, hands learn from wood. A gentle side note, in trades like this, rituals do not waste time. They weave it. He takes a slow tour of the drying ground, not as boss, not as judge, but as the partner who reads the room's posture. He tucks a brick at the base of one tower so it will think well of itself in wind. He turns another that has sheeted the brick behind it to sternly. He lifts a tower's top and puts it back in exactly the same way, just to confirm the stack's memory. It remembers. A cart rumbles along the dike, wheels speaking more loudly now that evening has made sound travel farther. 2 boys from earlier have filled it. They roll by, faces solemn with the serious joy of helping. He raises the tin cup, they raise theirs. Ritual finished, everyone is permitted to smile. He eats the kept heel of bread without fanfare, tasting caraway with more attention than it expected. The flavor makes him think of kitchens, of a table rubbed with salt, of a small pot boiling stubbornly over a low peat smoke, of a window where onions dry in plates, and of hands that will be glad of warm air close to ankles on a January morning. He places one brick with more care for having thought these thoughts. The light thins from the bottom upward. Greens change to olive, then to something the air refuses to name. The sky stays bright for longer than seems polite. This is the season's gift. He repositions 3 planks so tomorrow's first steps will be memory rather than decision. He rubs a bit of tallow on the cart's axle, then rolls the wheel twice so the song will be fresh in the morning. A gentle side note. Tomorrow's kindness is built now in pegged knots, in oiled wood, in pots that do not surprise bare feet. He unties the headscarf and wipes the cool sweat from his forehead, then ties it on again looser. He checks his belt, small knife seated, twine sleeping, cup clipped. He lifts to mint sprigs and tucks them into the cart rail at the other end. 2 letters now in case morning forgets the first. At the ditch he rinses his hands. The water is tea-colored where peat speaks to it, clean where it runs. He dries his fingers on sackcloth and gathers the cuttings of moss he set aside earlier, arranging them in a shallow patch with gentleness that would make a garden proud. The moss will settle at night. In a week it will look as if it never learned the word disturbance. The last task before actual leaving is the one he enjoys most. He walks the length of his towers and, with the back of his knuckles, taps each top brick in a quiet tally talk. Talk, 1 per stack. A song soft enough that only he and the field hear it. The sound maps his work into his bones so sleep will know what it is summing. He returns the spade to the shadowed side of the rise, where dew will not surprise it. He lays the paddle flat onto pebbles so air circles both faces. He coils the rope and slides the loop over the cart handle. He lifts a plank and balances it on his shoulder, the way a book might ride home from school. The bog releases one small bubble in the ditch, an old breath allowed to go and grow still. A gentle side note. Places sigh when we finish well. It is not superstition, it is the room learning quiet again. He steps onto the boardwalk, gives the stacks a last satisfied glance, and begins the short walk toward the dike. The cart follows. Along the canal, soft voices carry from a farmhouse over the reed tops, talk easy as washing dishes. A dog barks once, not at anything in particular, and thinks better of it. Swallows make a last ribbon and fold it. At the farm lane he pauses and looks back. The drying ground holds its new squared shadows as if they had grown there. Towers become silhouettes of patience. Wind moves through them as through a simple instrument. He tips the spade in salute to the bog, to the day, to the tools, to the ordinary success of rate and rhythm. He climbs the dike, the cart's wheel clicking kindly at each plank seam, and turns toward home where a low stack under the eaves waits to be increased by a few careful armloads. The sky ahead wears a long, pale stripe that promises a properly slow evening. The peat will continue to lighten in the night. Dew will visit, and remember to leave. Tomorrow's work is already arranged into lanes and ladders. He walks lighter than the cart suggests, with the satisfaction that comes when summer begins to remember how to be winter. Home begins where the lane lifts from reed shadow to the small square of yard that knows his clogs. The threshold stone wears a polish given by years of stepping over it with the same kind of care. He tips the cart's handle up and lets the axle rest against the low sill, wheel chopped with a wedge shaped by a pocket knife on a winter evening. The house answers with a smell the field does not know, bread crust that sang at noon, a cabbage that decided to be sweet when it met salt, wool that dried in a clean corner. Under the eaves, a modest peat stack waits. He adds today's lightest bricks to the top course, to fingers apart to invite air. Each piece finds its place as if shelves had been drawn in the air beforehand. He keeps the older bricks closer to the kitchen door where habit lives. The newer bricks stay north under the overhang that knows how to keep rain from prying. He taps one, listens, and taps another. The stack answers like a shelf of good books, quiet, reassuring, somehow heavier for being orderly. A gentle side note: houses learn their fuel the way hands learn their tools. Eaves memorize where smoke was born, lintels remember how warmth behaves. He sets the cart aside and carries a small armful of well-cured bricks indoors. The door opens with the sigh of a latch taught by soap and graphite. The hearth knows him. A black iron pot hangs from a hook with a temper that forgives clumsy appetites. He crumbles a pinch of dry kindling split reed, a twist of straw, then adds a thin sliver of last year's peat, its edges crisp, its color like a remembered story. The sliver takes a coal from yesterday's careful bed and shows a small orange thought. He adds to bricks and waits. They ask for patience, not air. He stirs soup that planned itself in the afternoon. Carrot, onion, a heel of pork, barley that softens as if it has met kindness. The spoon makes a low wooden note inside the pot. It belongs. He leaves the spoon resting across the rim so steam will talk to the handle and make it warm, not hot. The peat answers the iron with a steady, blue-tinged flame that eats at its own pace, not the pot's. He lays the spade onto pegs by the door, blade down, handle up, so the wood will not think about damp. He brushes peat dust from the shaft with the edge of his sleeve, then rubs a thumb of oil into the grain where hand meets handle most often. The wood darkens slightly, pleased. The paddle goes beside it, leaned with its face away from the wall so it will not learn a curve it does not need. From a peg hangs a string of onions, each bulb the size of a fist that has learned patience. He picks one with a twist that does not disturb its neighbors, sets it on the table, and cuts it into squares that promise to soften. The knife sound against wood is the kitchen's own abacus. He slides the onion into the pot, and the air changes to the good kind of savory, a smell that suggests stew and socks by the hearth, and windows behaving themselves. A neighbor taps the door and steps in with a loaf under a cloth and a question about boats. She leaves the loaf, he answers. The canalman called twice for tomorrow, if reeds keep their agreement with wind. They talk about letters versus towers, the same conversation they have all summers. She leans toward towers this year. He declares himself faithful to ladders until the day insists otherwise. They smile at the idea that a day might insist. She takes a small bundle of mint from the rail by the door. He adds 2 bricks to the hearth in exchange, not counted, simply placed. These are the books they keep. A gentle side note. Visiting is part shop, part weather report, part rehearsal for winter. No one says trade, the door knows. With light left, he returns to the yard to set tomorrow's ease in place. He flips the cover on the small wood bin to keep dew from practicing there. He shakes the boardwalk planks one by one and leans them so their undersides can stop pretending to be pawns. He lifts the cart's rope and slides his palm along it, checking for a rough spot. One scratchy place catches the skin's notice. He rubs it with tallow and smooths the strand between his fingers until the fibers lie down like content hair. He checks the eaves again. The new course sits square. A swallow returns to its nest and pins the evening to the beam with a small, self-satisfied chirr. He watches a moment in the manner that makes minutes stretch without asking. Then he goes in, because soup has a way of being perfectly itself only for a while. At the hearth, a spoonful tastes of the road home. He salts once, stirs twice, and sets the spoon aside. He places 2 bowls near the fire so heat will shake their chill loose. The peat flame becomes a thoughtful orange, edges blue where air remembers its manners. An iron trivet waits for bread. He warms the slices on both sides, turning them with a knife tip so the crust kisses hot metal but never stays long enough to complain. He's the first bowl standing, leaning a hip against the table the way people do in houses that tell them they are not guests. He saves the second bowl for later. He pushes one peat brick inward with the iron bar and watches flame withdraw and then return, resized by the nudge. He listens for the low hum the pot sings when it is content. It arrives. He tends to small maintenance while the house completes its evening arithmetic. He refills the water pitcher from the barrel and sets it where air circulates. He checks the shoe pegs and places clogs upside down so their hollow will be friendly to morning. He rubs a thin line of tallow along the cart's axle pin lying on the bench. Tomorrow's roll will thank him. He writes a thumbnail list on a scrap nailed to the post. Planks to move, mint to cut, rope good, bow task. Simple nudges to a head that might prefer cloud pictures at dawn. A gentle side note. Lists in small houses are not orders. They are courtesies to morning. He sits at the door with the second bowl and eats slowly, watching the yard cool from the edges inward. A hen wanders, pecks a half-hearted question from the earth, decides the day answered enough, and perches. The air carries a thread of yeast from a neighbor's oven, a clean smell from laundry under the eaves, and the honest shade of peat smoke that will never become fussy. He chews. He rests the spoon. He chews again. He goes back once more to the drying ground in his mind, as workers do with eyes half unfocused, seeing towers and ladders, the frames behaving as they should. The special row near the path tilted the right way. He makes one adjustment in imagination, turns a top brick to face the west little wine, then nods, trusting morning to remember. Inside, he tidies supper with kindness. The pot gets a warm rinse and a rub of salt on its belly. Iron likes that. The bowls turn upside down on a towel that waits beside the window. He banks the hearth with a small, settled square of peat. It will stay a red idea until the first stir at daybreak. He lays 2 bricks beside, near enough to read warmth, far enough not to learn haste. He steps outside for the sweep of last light. The canal is a flat pewter ribbon. The towers on the rise are silhouettes of sensibleness. Even the wind seems to walk softer between them. He hears the boatman again, farther off now, humming something that fits oars and evening both. He washes his hands in the basin at the door, the water gone brown in the obliging way peat water does, and dries them on a towel, already thinking about tomorrow. He lifts the paddle once more and strokes its face with a cloth the day's shine withdraws gracefully. He leans it on the pegs beside the spade, both tools in the posture of listening. He sets the tin cup upside down on its nail, bronze lip catching one more scrap of light. He pulls the door to with care, the latch answering in its comfortable syllable. A gentle side note: houses sleep best when tools are set where they expect to wake. The peat flame has settled to a low, trustworthy core. He sits on the stool, boots off, clogs drying, socks warm. He stretches his toes toward heat and feels the day travel out of the arches into the room. He leans his head back, eyes on the beam where the swallow's shape is a small dark comfort. He thinks of mint under cart rail, of frogs like commas, of a spade's iron lip going home to wood, of a boatman's chin greeting a spade in the language of weight. He drops one last small note into tomorrow's ledger, lay planks farther left you soft patch by the willow. The thought settles like a flat stone placed on a paper. The house arranges itself around sleep. The peat's low fire breathes as evenly as a careful animal. He listens to the hearth's quiet gratitude and lets his own shoulders agree. The evening has done its work. Night can inherit a room that knows where everything is. Dawn begins before the window learns to brighten. The hearth keeps a red seed under ash, a promise made the night before. He wakes to the familiar weight of air that has not hurried anywhere. Peat holds rooms in a particular quiet. He pulls socks that remember his feet, steps into clogs that have practiced greeting, and lifts the latch with the small turn that keeps wood in a friendly mood. Outside, the yard is a pale drawing of itself. Dew beads along the board edges, a neat line of planets the thumb could scatter. He tips each plank once, and lets the underside forget last night's damp. He checks the eaves, stack squares still square, gaps still generous. A swallow shakes its head from the nest and decides to approve today. The canal is a listening strip beyond it, reeds stand up straight as if they were learning from fences. He stirs the hearth and adds a modest brick. Flame finds its proper height, blue at the foot, clean at the edge. He puts yesterday's kettle back to work and sets to fix slices of bread on the trivet so warmth can visit both faces in turn. While water considers boiling, he oils the spade's handle where the hand travels most, a single thumbprint's worth rubbed until grain says thank you by darkening. A gentle side note: tools remember kindness with surface and sound. A smoother handle is a gratitude you can hold. Breakfast goes as simply as a line of black on white. He is standing, one hander on a warm cup, the other keeping bread honest. Then he carries the spade outside as if it could do the walking itself, and sets it against the wall while he fastens the cart's rope, checking the axle with a small, practiced tilt. The mint he tucked into the rail last night breathes a clear word. He smiles at the way a plant can keep an agreement. The boardwalk leads back to the bob like a sentence that knows where it should end. Plank, 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 then the small spring he trusts for water, then the first ditch. The frog commas appear again, exactly where a reader would want them. The field beyond is a soft grid of towers and ladders, everything aligns so wind will choose courtesy over creativity. He takes a moment to listen. The stacks answer with the hollow knock that means yesterday was wisely spent. He begins with turning. The top bricks, now held together by a firm skin, accept the paddle and rotate obediently. He makes the motion small and repeatable, a quiet clock that tells the day what hour it is. He leans to towers by a finger width to greet a wind that arrived from west by a little overnight. He ties a scarf tighter because the tension at the neck keeps the rest of the body attentive too. The first cartload is light and agreeable. He walks it to the rise and builds Hagen higher where yesterday's were content to be short. Each placement is a sentence with one verb hold. He adds a long stick between two tall stacks again, smiles that he thought of it yesterday, and hangs the damp cloth he brought to dry. By evening it will have learned a new word, ready. He returns to the cut and lays a new board where a foot might hesitate. The moss where he tucked it last night glows with the beginning. He smooths the lip of the trench with the spade, and the tool's iron mouth shines where peat has made it clean. He turns the remaining rows from yesterday with the same unfussy cadence, and sets aside a few bricks that prefer more day. Those go to a less ambitious corner, where the wind waits without judgment. A gentle side note, in drying fields as in kitchens, not everything is ready at once. The art is in making room for every temper. The neighbor with the kerchief passes, reeds balanced on the cart like a polite roof. She calls that the boatman plans to trips if weather stays sensible. He nods and flicks one tower's top brick into a bridge shape across its neighbor. More strength, more air. She points at his planks with a grin. You move them like a man who talks to boards. He answers. They answer if you ask politely, and both accept that this is true. By mid-morning the field's voice changes. Tap sounds sharpen. The bricks have learned to sound like pots that will ring instead of pots that will sigh. He tests a stack with the back of his knuckles. Talk and moves it up the list in his head marked ready for the cart. He sets aside the few that still want to be bread rather than stone and treats them with patience, which is the same as time but friendlier. He drinks from the spring, the cup slipped cold as a fact, and pours a little on the spade handle to wash away an honest smear. The water runs off in a thin brown ribbon and disappears where small roots approve. He lowers the cup and clips it back, that tiny nail, a piece of engineering that has supported more thirsts than many bridges do. He loads the cart, not past half. The wheel hums a low note of cooperation. He leans, hips square, and lets the cart's weight find the plank. At the rise he builds a long shelf of ready stacks, to men high, each with its deliberate gap. He checks the top bricks with his palm and taps once more. The shelf becomes a choir section ready to travel. He throws a cloth over one end to shade a braver row. Ambition appreciates a kind leash. A gentle side note, transport begins long before the boat. It begins when you range your yeses into rows the day can carry. Clouds stack on the horizon, amiable, deciding nothing yet. He returns to the cut and trims its edges again so water will know how to leave. He lays sod back over one corner with the care of a letter being sealed, palms smoothing, thumbs aligning. He presses his mark, a shallow press of 2 fingers into moss that will mean to his own eye in a month, we were kind here. He lifts a last small brick from the lower edge and sets it on the board to think about its future. By noon he has a line of towers that ask to be counted by cart and a second line that ask to be topped to ask. He eats a modest piece of cheese and 1 slice of bread. He had no intention of denying himself. He stands while he chews and looks at the canal. The boatman appears at last, sail making a friendly geometry against a sky that wants to be reasonable. The boat slides in with no fuss. The boatman's chin rises. His rises back. They have reached consensus in a language made of nods. He ferries the first loads to the bank, not stacking on the boat yet, only staging them in a sensible row. The boatman adjusts the sail, checks the ropes, and looks at the sky the way experienced men look at clocks. "We'll take 2 rows now," he says, "and greet the rest later, if the West keeps its voice." "2 rows is what I have ready," he answers, which is the pleasure of playing. They load in a rhythm that does not need to be agreed upon because it was agreed upon before both were born. Brick passes to hand, hand to deck, deck to neatness. The boat makes a deeper sound as it accepts weight, but does not remember to complain. They pause once to let the boat find its new balance. It finds it as a skilled person finds a familiar bench. The boatman wedges, ropes, nods. The cutter adds 1 more brick, then removes it, then returns it. 3 actions that make a science without papers. A gentle side note: balance is the arithmetic of useful days. Too much, and ropes scold. Too little, and trips multiply. The middle saves ankles and tempers. The first trip leaves sail pleased with its job. He returns to the field and turns the less certain stacks, adding small bridges, widening alleys that had grown too proud. He lays a fresh plank over a soft patch where his morning self warned him to take care. He thanks that self silently and pretends he always listened so well. Afternoon takes on its gentle slope. He rests when the body says rest. He works when the body says work. In the pauses, he does small kindnesses, turns a brick at the stack's foot, leans a tower with the weight of 1 finger, raises the cart's handle so the rope will not learn the ground as a habit. He builds to quick frames from units that want more room, and the wind answers like a pleased teacher. By late afternoon the boat returns lighter of water and hungrier for stacks. They finish the first shelf and begin a second. The boatman leaves a promise if dusk is polite, a 3rd pass. The cutter arranges the next row in the boat's favorite sequence: heavy, lighter, lightest, so the sail will be dignified in small changes of wind. The boatman approves by not correcting anything. The last work is the best kind of small. He straightens the rise as if it were a room before guests, sweeping with the flat of his hand, pushing crumbs of peat into tidy lines that the breeze will adopt. He shakes the cloth from the shaded row and sees the skin firm, the color soft chocolate. He taps stock good. He pulls the boardwalk in a length, balances planks on shoulder, carries them back to the yard into trips that feel like closing parentheses. A gentle side note: endings have shape. A field that finishes square lets sleep walk in without searching for its bed. Home receives him with the smell of yesterday's soup reheated into today's comfort. He banks the hearth with 2 smaller bricks and a sliver, enough heat to write a letter to every corner of the room. He eats at the table, elbows off, spoon slow, listening to the tiny changes in flame that come when Pete remembers summer and turns it into winter's favor. He sets aside a slice of bread because an evening always tastes better if it ends with something saved. He steps outside 1 last time. The rise is a choir of shadows now, each tower a quiet note on a staff he drew with his hands. Far on the canal, a thin line moves, boat and sail and purpose. The sky agrees to soften. Reeds clack their small castanets. Frogs file their commas in sensible places. He thinks of boots beside a hearth in January, of steam climbing a window corner and learning to be patient, of a kettle that knows when to hum and when to be silent, of a room that will be warmer because this day existed. He checks the eaves, touches the nearest brick with his palm as if thanking a book for its paragraph, and goes in. He wipes the spade's mouth with its cloth one more time, then leans it to rest. The house lowers its shoulders. His body does the same. Sleep will find its path without asking. Now these quiet rooms and fields can keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.